Her brother's wedding was supposed to be perfect, until she found her billionaire husband with his hands on her sister-in-law in a guest bedroom, shirts disheveled, guilt written across both their faces. But instead of panicking when she walked back into the ballroom, her brother smiled and tapped the microphone. "I have a video montage celebrating love, loyalty, and knowing exactly who belongs in your inner circle." The lights went dark, the screens blazed to life, and 300 guests gasped as security footage from 8 months of documented betrayal began playing. But what Amanda didn't know was that her entire marriage had been a calculated con, and Joseph had evidence that would destroy more than just an affair. Welcome back, my strong family and friends, to Mr. Crown Stories. If no one told you today, hear this: you are enough. You are worthy. You are the survivor who refused to stay broken. I create these stories for souls like yours, tested by fire but emerging as gold, carrying wounds that became wisdom. If this story speaks to your heart, click subscribe, type "I am here," and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow brings another journey of triumph, and you deserve to witness it. Every word I write is for you, the one who faced betrayal and chose dignity, who walked through darkness and found their own light. May your heart discover peace, may your burdens become lighter, and may your spirit dance with the joy of better days ahead. Let's walk this road together, hand in hand, heart to heart. Now, let us begin. Some betrayals announce themselves slowly, sending warning signals through changing patterns and cooling affections. Others arrive wearing your husband's cologne and your sister-in-law's smile, catching you completely unprepared for the destruction they're about to unleash. Amanda Festa understood power in ways most people would spend lifetimes attempting to comprehend. She had rescued a dying tech company bleeding money and talent, transforming it into a global empire that stretched across 4 continents and employed thousands. She negotiated billion-dollar deals that made seasoned executives with silver hair and corner offices nervous enough to loosen their designer ties. She commanded absolute respect in boardrooms specifically designed to intimidate women who looked like her, spoke like her, dreamed like her. Tonight, emerald silk wrapped around her body like liquid confidence captured in fabric form. The dress had been custom designed by an exclusive atelier in Paris, hand-stitched over 3 months by artisans who understood that clothing could be armor. Her hair cascaded in carefully styled waves that had required 2 specialists and 4 hours of meticulous work, each section positioned with a precision she applied to everything in her carefully constructed life. Diamonds caught the ballroom's chandelier light as she moved through the Riverside estate, a venue she'd personally selected after visiting 17 different locations and financed without hesitation at the 7-figure price tag, because Joseph, her baby brother, deserved nothing less than perfection for his celebration. Joseph was marrying the woman who'd captured his heart, and Amanda had ensured this wedding would be remembered by every single one of the 300 guests in attendance for the rest of their lives. She just didn't anticipate how those memories would sear like acid across her soul. "You've completely outdone yourself, sis," Joseph murmured beside the champagne fountain that had cost more than most luxury vehicles, watching impeccably dressed guests dance beneath Austrian crystal chandeliers that transformed ordinary light into something magical and otherworldly. His bride, Priya, glided past them in a dress that seemed woven from captured starlight and pure dreams, her face radiating the kind of joy that made even the most cynical observers reconsider their positions on love and commitment. The 12-piece orchestra filled the massive ballroom with melodies so perfectly executed they could soften even the hardest hearts. Amanda squeezed her brother's hand with genuine affection, feeling pride expand in her chest until it felt almost overwhelming. "You deserve every beautiful thing this world has to offer. Both of you earned this happiness after everything you've survived together." Samuel supposed to give his best man toast in exactly 5 minutes. Have you seen him anywhere? People are starting to notice his absence. The question dropped into Amanda's chest like a stone thrown into perfectly still water, creating ripples of unease that spread through her entire body with uncomfortable speed. She scanned the opulent ballroom with a kind of precision that had made her legendary in corporate negotiations, cataloging every visible face with a photographic accuracy that had served her well in hostile takeovers and emergency board meetings. Her parents occupied the family table draped in ivory linens that cost hundreds per yard, her mother's elegant fingers resting gently on her father's arm, both of them glowing with parental pride. Priya's relatives mingled easily with cousins Amanda had personally flown in from 5 different states, covering every expense without hesitation because family mattered infinitely more than money ever could. The orchestra transitioned seamlessly into something jazzy and upbeat, couples flooding the dance floor with enthusiasm and champagne-fueled confidence. But her husband had completely vanished from sight. Probably handling some urgent business call that couldn't wait, Amanda offered, though the lie tasted like ash and rust combined on her tongue. Samuel was a brilliant businessman who'd built his own empire through strategic investments and calculated risks, someone who matched her ambition stride for stride. She'd loved him for that, or at least convinced herself she had, building an entire life around the comfortable belief that partnership and mutual respect mattered infinitely more than passion and unpredictable emotion. 4 years of marriage. 4 years of carefully ignoring the warning signs that had been accumulating like storm clouds on a distant horizon. His gaze that perpetually slid away whenever she sought genuine emotional connection. His increasingly convenient late nights at the office whenever she needed meaningful conversation about their future. His touch that felt mechanical rather than meaningful, born from obligation instead of actual desire, going through familiar motions rather than sharing genuine passion. "Let me find him and see what's going on," Amanda said, her designer heels clicking measured rhythms against imported marble floors as she navigated through the crowded ballroom like water finding microscopic cracks in stone. Her presence commanded attention even as she attempted discretion and subtlety. Well-meaning guests tried stopping her for effusive compliments about the spectacular wedding, transparent networking opportunities they hoped she wouldn't notice, probing questions about her company's latest expansion into Southeast Asian markets. But she deflected everything with a practiced grace born from years spent negotiating hostile corporate environments, having learned long ago how to project perfect calm while anxiety clawed viciously at her insides like a caged animal. The guest wing stretched ahead down a corridor lined with polished mahogany doors and expensive silence, broken only by the distant sound of music and celebration filtering through thick walls. Soft amber lighting created dancing shadows on silk-covered walls displaying original artwork worth more than most people's annual salaries. Her instincts screamed increasingly urgent warnings, the primal knowing buried deep in her bones that something fundamental and irreversible was currently shattering into irreparable pieces. She'd watched Samuel head precisely this direction earlier, his tuxedo jacket slung carelessly across his shoulder, his phone pressed urgently against his ear, his expression radiating the kind of irritation usually reserved for genuine emergencies or major deal collapses. He'd physically waved her off when she'd approached to ask if everything was all right, mouthing "important call," alongside a dismissive look that made her feel like an unwanted interruption rather than his concerned wife. The first door refused her exploratory touch, locked tight with no light visible beneath the frame. The second opened smoothly to reveal nothing but darkness and furniture arranged precisely for guests who hadn't yet arrived. The third room revealed an unused bedroom carrying distinct traces of expensive perfume that made her pause mid-step, made her pulse accelerate uncomfortably, made warning bells ring louder in her mind. The fourth door stood slightly ajar, warm light spilling through the gap like a golden invitation to absolute devastation. Amanda pushed it wider with agonizing slowness, her tactical mind already constructing increasingly elaborate explanations that might somehow survive logical scrutiny. Maybe he'd catastrophically spilled red wine on his pristine white shirt and desperately needed privacy to change before giving his speech. Maybe that supposedly important call demanded complete isolation away from music and celebration. Maybe he'd suddenly felt violently ill and needed to lie down briefly before facing 300 expectant guests waiting for his toast. Every single maybe shattered simultaneously into razor-sharp fragments that would cut her soul repeatedly. Samuel stood behind Victoria near the silk-covered bed, his previously immaculate shirt unbuttoned and hanging open, exposing his chest. His usually meticulously styled hair messed up exactly like someone had run eager fingers through it repeatedly during passionate activity. Victoria, her sister-in-law, her brother's new wife's sister, the woman who'd embraced Amanda warmly that very morning while calling her the inspiration she'd always admired, leaned into him with zero possible ambiguity, zero conceivable innocent interpretation available to anyone with functioning eyes. His hand rested on Victoria's hip with a kind of familiarity that spoke of practice and repetition. Her fingers traced his exposed chest with the confidence of someone who'd done this before, many times before, in many different locations. Their bodies pressed together in a way that made Amanda's carefully constructed world tilt dangerously on its axis. Amanda stood frozen in that doorway while something deep inside her chest went completely, utterly, devastatingly silent. Not her heart breaking dramatically, Because breaking hearts made theatrical noise, demanded immediate acknowledgement from witnesses, required validation from others. This felt profoundly different. This was her entire carefully constructed foundation, simultaneously discovering it had been built entirely on unstable sand, watching every structure she'd painstakingly built over 4 years crumble in horrible slow motion while she remained completely powerless to prevent the collapse. Samuel noticed her frozen presence first, his eyes expanding with pure undiluted panic, his mouth forming her name in a soundless gasp of horror, his hands scrambling desperately to step away from Victoria, to somehow transform this scene into literally anything except exactly what it so obviously was. Victoria gasped sharply, a sound trapped precisely between genuine surprise and dawning horror. Her lipstick slightly smeared, her carefully styled hair disturbed at the temples, her expression cycling rapidly through shock, guilt, and something that looked disturbingly close to defiance. Amanda didn't scream or cry or demand immediate explanations or throw justified accusations. She didn't collapse theatrically the way women always did in romantic films when discovering betrayal, when their entire worlds imploded in spectacular cinematic fashion designed for maximum emotional impact and audience sympathy. Instead, she reached calmly into her expensive evening clutch with hands that remained perfectly steady, retrieving her phone with the kind of surgical precision she applied to hostile business negotiations and corporate warfare. "Amanda, wait. This absolutely isn't what you think it is," Samuel started desperately, raw panic cracking his voice into pathetic pieces, his hands raised like he could somehow physically stop what was already in motion. She captured the first damning photo. The camera flash flooded the entire room like lightning illuminating a crime scene. The angle was absolutely perfect. The visual evidence completely irrefutable in any conceivable legal proceeding or divorce court. "Baby, please just let me explain everything. It was a terrible mistake. It didn't mean anything at all." Second devastating photo from a strategically different position. Perfect insurance for the approaching war she could already feel building on the horizon. Third photo capturing Victoria's horrified expression, her hand still resting on Samuel's chest, the physical evidence of intimacy impossible to deny or explain away with clever words and manufactured excuses. Amanda walked out with the same quiet, terrifying composure she used in boardrooms seconds before dismantling entire corporations and ending careers with surgical precision. Behind her, Samuel's voice cracked with desperate pleading. Victoria's higher-pitched protests joined his in a pathetic chorus of panic and damage control. But Amanda didn't stop walking. She didn't look back. Her heels clicked measured rhythms against marble floors like a countdown timer reaching zero, each step taking her further from the man she trusted and closer to whatever devastating truth awaited her in the ballroom beyond. Because across that glittering space filled with celebration and champagne and 300 witnesses, Joseph saw the horror harden on his sister's face as she emerged from the corridor. And instead of panicking, instead of rushing to comfort her, instead of demanding explanations, he smiled. A slow, dangerous smile that didn't reach his eyes. And he whispered as he passed her on his way to the stage, "Amanda, breathe. The real show begins now." The word sent ice cascading down Amanda's spine, not from fear, but from recognition. Because Joseph Festa wasn't a man who threatened lightly. He wasn't a man who made empty promises or engaged in theatrical gestures without purpose and planning. Her baby brother, the smiling groom in the immaculate tuxedo, had known. The realization hit Amanda with the force of a physical blow as she watched Joseph stride toward the stage with predatory grace, his expression transforming from jovial groom into something far more dangerous and calculating. The orchestra finished their current piece, and the conductor glanced toward Joseph with perfectly timed coordination that suggested this moment had been rehearsed, planned, orchestrated down to the last devastating detail. How long had he known? Amanda's mind raced backward through recent months, searching for clues she'd missed while building empires and negotiating deals and trusting the wrong people with access to her carefully guarded heart. Joseph's subtle questions about Samuel's business trips that had seemed like casual brotherly concern. His carefully worded suggestions that Amanda consider updating her prenuptial agreement with additional protective clauses. His insistence on hiring the specific photographer and videographer for tonight's wedding, professionals whose portfolios emphasized capturing every genuine moment and unguarded truth. The champagne fountain beside her continued bubbling with expensive indifference, crystal glasses catching light and transforming it into rainbow fractals that danced across designer clothing and false smiles. 300 guests gradually noticed Joseph's movement toward the stage, conversations tapering into expectant silence as the groom claimed his position behind the microphone with the confidence of someone who'd spent years commanding attention in boardrooms and courtrooms alike. Amanda's parents looked up from their table with proud parental expressions, completely unaware that their daughter's world had just shattered into irreparable fragments in a guest room corridor. Priya stood near the elaborate wedding cake, 7 tiers of architectural perfection decorated with handcrafted sugar flowers that had required 3 days of continuous work, her face radiating the kind of trusting innocence that made Amanda's chest tighten with protective fury. Did Priya know? Had Joseph's brilliant, beautiful bride been complicit in whatever devastating plan her husband had orchestrated, or was she about to discover that her wedding day would be remembered for reasons far different than romantic celebration and happily ever after promises? Samuel emerged from a corridor behind Amanda, his shirt hastily buttoned but still disheveled, his hair finger-combed into something approaching acceptable, his expression cycling rapidly between panic and desperate calculation. Victoria followed seconds later, her lipstick wiped away but leaving telltale traces, her bridesmaid dress slightly wrinkled in ways that told their own damning story to anyone observant enough to notice the details. "Amanda, please," Samuel hissed urgently, reaching for her arm with fingers that had been touching another woman's body mere minutes ago. "We need to talk about this privately before you do something you'll regret." She stepped smoothly away from his grasp without even glancing in his direction, her emerald dress swirling around her legs like liquid armor, her posture radiating the kind of untouchable dignity that made lesser mortals instinctively step back and reassess their approach strategies. "Don't," she said softly, her voice carrying more threat in that single syllable than most people could pack into entire speeches. "Don't touch me. Don't speak to me. Don't even breathe in my direction." On stage, Joseph tapped the microphone with casual grace, the sound echoing through the ballroom's perfect acoustics and silencing the remaining scattered conversations with efficient finality. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice warm and welcoming, his smile absolutely devastating in its calculated charm. "Thank you all for joining Priya and myself on this incredible evening. Your presence means everything to us, and we're honored to celebrate this beginning of our forever surrounded by the people we love most in this world." Polite applause rippled through the crowd. Someone whistled enthusiastically from the back. Priya's grandmother dabbed at her eyes with an embroidered handkerchief, overcome with sentimental emotion. Joseph's gaze found Amanda across the ballroom, found her standing rigid and composed while Samuel hovered behind her like a guilty shadow, and something fierce and protective flashed across his expression before he smoothly continued. "Before we continue with toasts and celebration, I have a special presentation prepared. Something I've been working on for quite some time." He paused deliberately, letting anticipation build through the crowd like rising pressure before a storm. A video montage celebrating love, loyalty, and the importance of knowing exactly who belongs in your inner circle. Amanda's pulse hammered against her throat as understanding crashed over her in devastating waves. Joseph hadn't just known about the affair. He'd documented it. He'd planned this entire evening as an elaborate trap, using his own wedding as the stage for exposure and destruction, turning what should have been celebration into something far more dangerous and irrevocable. The massive screens mounted throughout the ballroom, screens Amanda had personally approved for displaying romantic photographs and heartfelt video messages from distant relatives, flickered to life with synchronized precision. And the real show began. The ballroom lights dimmed with theatrical timing, plunging 300 guests into anticipatory darkness broken only by the screen's cold illumination. Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. Someone laughed nervously. A champagne glass clinked against china in the sudden silence. Then the footage began playing with devastating clarity. The first image froze Amanda's blood in her veins. Samuel and Victoria in the hotel lobby of the Grandview, that exclusive establishment where Amanda herself held a platinum membership, where she'd personally recommended Samuel book rooms for out-of-town wedding guests, never imagining he'd use her own resources to facilitate his betrayal. The timestamp read 3 months ago. Victoria's hand rested on Samuel's forearm with casual familiarity. His head tilted toward hers in a way that suggested whispered intimacies rather than polite conversation. The security camera angle captured everything with damning clarity, The kind of footage that couldn't be explained away with creative lies or manufactured excuses about business meetings and coincidental encounters. The second image appeared before the first fully registered in Amanda's fracturing mind. Same hotel. Different date. 2 months ago. Samuel and Victoria entering an elevator together, her body angled toward his with unmistakable intent, his hand hovering at the small of her back in that possessive way Amanda had once believed belonged exclusively to her. Gasps erupted throughout the ballroom like synchronized detonations. Someone's champagne flute shattered against marble flooring. An elderly aunt pressed her hand against her chest in theatrical shock. Priya's mother stood abruptly from the family table, her face cycling through confusion, horror, and dawning comprehension in rapid succession. The third image made Amanda's knees threaten to buckle. Victoria and Samuel in a private dining room at Celestia, that exclusive restaurant where Amanda and Samuel had celebrated their third wedding anniversary just weeks ago, where he'd looked into her eyes over candlelight and promised her forever, where she'd actually believed him. The timestamp read 1 month ago. Before Amanda could process the full scope of what she was witnessing, before her mind could construct any remaining defense mechanisms against the truth unfolding in high definition across multiple screens, a hand closed firmly around her elbow. Joseph. He guided her away from the frozen tableau of guests with a kind of smooth efficiency that suggested he'd planned this extraction down to the precise second. His grip was gentle but absolutely unyielding as he maneuvered her through a side door into a private gallery space lined with expensive artwork and blessed silence. The door clicked shut, muffling the chaos erupting in the ballroom beyond. "Breathe," Joseph commanded softly, his hand settling on her shoulders with that protective big brother energy that had sheltered her through childhood nightmares and adolescent heartbreaks and corporate battles that nearly destroyed her before she learned to fight back properly. "Amanda, I need you to breathe for me right now." She realized she'd been holding her breath until her lungs burned with deprivation. Air rushed in with a gasping sound that horrified her with its vulnerability and weakness. "How long?" The words scraped against her throat like broken glass. "How long have you known?" Joseph's jaw tightened in that particular way that meant he was choosing his words with surgical precision, measuring each syllable for maximum impact and minimal collateral damage to her already shattered composure. 6 months, he admitted quietly. "I hired a private investigator after Samuel's behavior at Mom's birthday dinner. The way he kept disappearing to take calls. The way Victoria's eyes followed him around the room like he was magnetic north, and she was a compass incapable of finding any other direction." 6 months. Amanda's mind reeled backward through half a year of memories, recontextualizing every moment through this devastating new lens. 6 months of Joseph knowing, watching, gathering evidence while she'd continued living in blissful ignorance, trusting the wrong people, believing in promises that had already been broken beyond any possibility of repair. "You didn't tell me," she whispered, and the betrayal in those 4 words made Joseph flinch like she'd physically struck him. "I tried," he said, his voice cracking with genuine anguish. 3 years ago, Amanda. Do you remember? Right after Victoria started showing up at every single one of your company events, always positioned exactly where Samuel would notice her, always wearing colors that complemented his suits with suspicious perfection. The memory surfaced through her shock like debris floating to the surface after an underwater explosion. "Sis, I don't trust her." Victoria's got this way of attaching herself to successful people like a beautiful parasite. "She did it to my college roommate, nearly destroyed his engagement. I'm telling you, watch how she looks at Samuel when she thinks nobody's paying attention." Amanda had dismissed his concerns with the confident blindness of someone who believed love and loyalty were shields against calculated betrayal. She defended Victoria, championed her presence at family gatherings, insisted that Joseph was being overprotective and paranoid and projecting his college drama onto innocent present circumstances. She'd chosen trust. And trust had betrayed her with Samuel's hands and Victoria's smile. "I was so stupid," Amanda breathed, the words tasting like poison and truth combined. All those business trips Samuel took to expand the Singapore office. All those late nights Victoria claimed she was working on her fashion blog. All those family dinners where they'd conveniently arrive and leave at exactly the same time. "You weren't stupid," Joseph interrupted fiercely, his hands tightening on her shoulders until she had no choice but to meet his blazing gaze. "You were trusting. There's a difference. You believed in the goodness of people you loved, and they exploited that trust because they're fundamentally broken humans who mistake manipulation for power. A laugh bubbled up from somewhere deep in Amanda's chest, bitter and sharp and dangerously close to hysteria. And now you're destroying them at your own wedding reception. Joseph, this is insane. This is justice, he finished calmly. This is justice served exactly where they thought they were untouchable. They used our family celebrations as cover for their affair. They used your resources, your trust, your love as weapons against you. So I'm using my celebration to expose exactly who they are to every single person who matters in our social and professional circles. Through the door, Amanda could hear escalating chaos, raised voices, accusations flying, Samuel's desperate attempts at damage control colliding with Victoria's higher-pitched protests and denials that convinced absolutely nobody with functioning critical thinking skills. I have more than just security footage, Joseph continued, his voice dropping into something cold and strategic. I have text messages recovered from Victoria's cloud backup that she thought she deleted. I have hotel receipts paid for with your corporate credit card that Samuel claimed were legitimate business expenses. I have testimony from 3 different hotel staff members who recognized them as repeat customers requesting the same room number each visit. Each revelation landed like a physical blow, systematically dismantling every remaining illusion Amanda had constructed about her marriage, her judgment, her ability to recognize predators wearing the masks of people she loved. Why now? She asked, her voice steadying into something that resembled her normal boardroom composure. Why wait 6 months? Why let me continue living the lie? Because I needed irrefutable evidence, Joseph said simply. Samuel's a lawyer. Victoria's an expert at playing the victim and manipulating narratives to her advantage. If I told you 6 months ago with only suspicions and circumstantial evidence, they would have gaslit you into doubting your own instincts. They would have spun stories about misunderstandings and innocent friendships and your brother being jealous of your happiness. He was right. Amanda knew her husband's skill at verbal manipulation, his ability to twist facts and reframe reality until black became white and betrayal became misunderstanding. She knew Victoria's talent for tears and wounded expressions that made people instinctively rush to comfort her and question whoever dared to accuse her of wrongdoing. So you waited until you could destroy them completely, Amanda said, and something fierce and grateful kindled in her chest alongside the devastation. You waited until there was no possible defense, no escape route, no way for them to spin this into anything except exactly what it is. I waited, Joseph confirmed, until I could ensure you'd walk away from this as the victor instead of the victim. Until I could guarantee that when this story spreads through our circles, and it will spread, sis, like wildfire through dry brush, everyone will see you as the woman who stood with dignity while lesser people burned themselves with their own choices. Tears finally broke through Amanda's composure, spilling hot trails down her carefully made-up face, ruining foundation that had taken an artist an hour to perfect. But these weren't tears of weakness or collapse. These were tears of release, of grief for the life she believed in and the future she'd planned, of rage at the people who'd stolen months and years of her trust and devotion. Joseph pulled her into a fierce embrace, letting her sob against his pristine tuxedo while the party beyond the door descended into spectacular chaos. "I've got you," he murmured against her hair, the same words he'd spoken when she was 7 and fell off her bike, when she was 16 and experienced her first heartbreak, when she was 25 and nearly lost her company to hostile takeover attempts. "I've always got you, sis. And I promise you, by the time this night ends, everyone will know exactly who deserves their respect and who deserves their contempt." Amanda pulled back, wiping her face with shaking hands, feeling something like steel beginning to reinforce her spine where devastation had tried to collapse her entirely. What happens next? Joseph's smile transformed into something predatory and absolutely terrifying in its controlled fury. "Next, I finish what I started. The footage playing right now? That's just the appetizer. I've got text message screenshots, financial records, and witness testimony queued up for the main course." "Joseph. They humiliated you in a guest room at my wedding," he said, his voice dropping into deadly quiet intensity. "They thought they were clever, sneaking away during what should have been a sacred celebration. They gambled that you'd stay silent to avoid scandal, that you'd protect your reputation by protecting theirs." He straightened his tuxedo jacket, checked his appearance in an ornate mirror with the calm precision of a general preparing for battle, then turned back to face his sister with eyes that promised absolute destruction for anyone who dared to hurt her. But they forgot one crucial detail, Joseph continued. They forgot that before you became a billionaire tech mogul, before you built your empire and commanded respect in rooms designed to exclude you, you were my sister. And I've been protecting you since the day you were born. He moved toward the door, his hand resting on the handle, his posture radiating lethal purpose wrapped in expensive tailoring and cultivated charm. Stay here as long as you need, he said gently. Compose yourself. Fix your makeup. Or don't, let them see that they made you cry. Either way, when you're ready, come back out there and watch me finish dismantling their lives with the same precision they used trying to dismantle yours. The door opened, releasing a wave of continued chaos, arguments, gasps, the sound of people already recording the scandal on their phones to spread across social media and group chats and professional networks before the night ended. Joseph paused in the doorway, looking back at Amanda with fierce protective love radiating from every line of his body. The real show is just beginning, he promised. And this time, you're going to walk away victorious. Then he was gone, striding back toward the ballroom with the confident grace of someone who'd been planning this devastation for 6 methodical months. Amanda stood alone in the gallery, surrounded by expensive art and blessed silence, feeling her heart simultaneously breaking and hardening into something that would never be vulnerable to this particular species of betrayal again. She took 3 deep breaths, fixed her posture, wiped the remaining tears from her face with hands that no longer trembled. Then she followed her brother back into the ballroom. The lights had dimmed to near darkness, transforming the celebration space into something that felt more like a theater preparing for the final devastating act of a tragedy. Joseph stood on stage, illuminated by a single spotlight, his hand resting casually on the microphone stand with the easy confidence of someone who owned every molecule of air in the room. 300 guests had fallen into stunned silence, their attention locked on the groom who'd just exposed one of the evening's most prominent couples as calculating adulterers who'd weaponized family trust and corporate resources to facilitate their betrayal. Samuel stood near the back, his face pale in the dim lighting, Victoria beside him looking equally terrified, both of them realizing too late that they'd walked into an elaborately constructed trap with no possible escape routes remaining. Amanda positioned herself where Joseph could see her, where her presence would remind him why this mattered, why this public destruction was necessary and deserved. Their eyes met across the ballroom. Joseph smiled. Then he tapped the microphone, the sound echoing through perfect acoustics and absolute silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice warm and welcoming despite the devastation he was orchestrating, "before we continue celebrating love and commitment and the sacred bonds that hold families together through every trial." He paused deliberately, letting anticipation build like pressure before a storm, letting every person in that ballroom lean forward in their seats, unable to look away from whatever was coming next. "I have a small presentation I'd like to share with all of you." The lights went completely black. The darkness lasted exactly 7 seconds. 7 seconds of absolute silence so complete Amanda could hear her own heartbeat thundering against her ribcage, could hear 300 people holding their collective breath, could hear the faint rustle of expensive fabric as guests shifted in their seats with anticipation and dread. Then the screens blazed to life with brightness that felt like exposure, like revelation, like truth stripped of all protective shadows and comfortable lies. The first image wasn't the hotel lobby footage Joseph had shown her privately. This was worse. This was personal. The timestamp read 8 months ago, 2 months before Joseph had even hired his investigator, which meant this betrayal had roots that went deeper and darker than Amanda had allowed herself to comprehend even in her worst spiraling thoughts during sleepless nights. Samuel and Victoria at Amanda's own charity gala, the one she'd organized to fund literacy programs in underserved communities, the one where she'd been on stage giving an impassioned speech about empowering the next generation while her husband and sister-in-law had apparently been empowering each other in stolen moments between champagne toasts and silent auction bidding. The security footage captured them in a side corridor, pressed together with zero ambiguity, Victoria's hand tangled in Samuel's hair, his fingers gripping her waist with possessive hunger that Amanda recognized because those same hands had once touched her that way, back when his desire had been genuine instead of performance art designed to maintain access to her resources and reputation. The gasps started small, scattered inhalations of shock from guests positioned closest to the screens, then grew into a wave of collective horror that crashed through the ballroom like a physical force. "Oh my God," someone whispered loudly enough to carry. That's Samuel," another voice confirmed, as if anyone in the room harbored any remaining doubt about the identities of the people currently being immortalized in their betrayal across 8 different high-definition screens strategically positioned throughout the venue. "And Victoria," a third voice added, dripping with scandalized delight that came from witnessing someone else's life implode in spectacular fashion. At Amanda's charity event. They were, "Oh, that's just disgusting." The next image appeared before the first could fully register in 300 minds, simultaneously processing the same devastating information. Different location. Different date. Same damning intimacy. Victoria and Samuel in the parking garage of Amanda's corporate headquarters, tucked between luxury vehicles worth more than most people's houses, their bodies pressed together in a way that made several elderly guests avert their eyes while younger attendees pulled out phones to capture the scandal for social media immortality. The timestamp read 6 months ago. Around the same time Samuel had convinced Amanda to make Victoria her personal assistant for an upcoming product launch, claiming his sister-in-law needed professional development opportunities and Amanda was the perfect mentor figure. Amanda had agreed because she trusted her husband's judgment, because she believed in supporting family, because she was fundamentally decent in ways that predators recognized and exploited with surgical precision. Victoria had used that access to steal proprietary information, to coordinate meeting times with Samuel, to position herself exactly where she could maximum damage while wearing the mask of grateful mentee and devoted family member. The third image made Amanda's mother stand abruptly from the family table, her hand pressed against her mouth in horror, her eyes wide with the kind of maternal anguish that came from watching your daughter's world burn in real time across multiple screens while 300 witnesses documented every second. Samuel and Victoria at the family beach house in the Hamptons, the property Amanda had purchased as a retreat for her parents and brother, the sanctuary where they'd celebrated birthdays and holidays and quiet weekends away from corporate pressure and public scrutiny. The timestamp read 4 months ago, during what Samuel had called an emergency work weekend, that required his immediate attention and couldn't possibly be delayed. The security camera footage showed him arriving Friday evening. Victoria's car pulling in exactly 17 minutes later. Neither of them leaving until Sunday afternoon. "Jesus Christ," Priya's father muttered, his voice carrying through the ballroom's perfect acoustics. "In their family home. They actually..." He couldn't finish the sentence. Nobody needed him to. The footage continued its relentless march through documented betrayal, each new image more damning than the last, each timestamp another nail in coffins that Samuel and Victoria had been constructing for months without realizing someone was carefully, methodically, gathering evidence for exactly this moment of total exposure. Hotel lobbies in 3 different cities. Restaurant balconies where they'd thought darkness provided cover. Samuel's hand constantly finding Victoria's, in elevators, in corridors, in parking structures, always touching with a kind of familiar intimacy that comes only from repetition and comfort and the arrogant assumption that they were cleverer than everyone around them. Victoria's family occupied 2 tables near the dance floor, their expressions cycling through shock, horror, shame and fury in rapid succession. Her mother had gone pale as bleached linen, her carefully applied makeup suddenly looking garish against skin drained of all color. Her father's jaw clenched so tightly Amanda could see the muscle jumping from across the ballroom, his hands fisted on the table like he was physically restraining himself from violence. Priya stood near the wedding cake, that 7-tier architectural masterpiece that now felt like a monument to naivety and misplaced trust, her face composed but her eyes glittering with unshed tears. Not for herself, Amanda realized with a sharp pang of gratitude. Priya was crying for her, for the sister-in-law who'd financed this entire celebration only to have it transform into the stage for her public humiliation. Except it wasn't humiliation landing on Amanda's shoulders. The crowd's energy was shifting, redirecting, finding its proper targets with the kind of mob mentality that could destroy reputations and social standing in a single evening of viral scandal. How could they? A woman Amanda recognized from various charity boards demanded, her voice pitched loud enough to ensure maximum audience. Amanda gave Victoria opportunities, introduced her to important people, treated her like family. And that bastard Samuel, someone else interjected with venomous satisfaction. Using her company resources, her properties, her trust. The ballroom doors crashed open with theatrical timing. Samuel burst through like a man possessed, his shirt still disheveled from their earlier encounter, his face flushed with panic and rage combined, his eyes wild with the desperate calculation of someone watching their carefully constructed life collapse in real time. "Stop this!" he roared, his voice cracking with fury as he charged toward the stage where Joseph stood illuminated in the spotlight, calm as still water before a tsunami. "Stop the video right now. This is defamation. This is a violation of privacy. I'll sue you for everything." Joseph didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't show even a flicker of concern as Samuel stormed toward him with all the impotent rage of a man realizing too late that he'd walked into a trap with no escape route. Instead, Joseph smiled. That same slow, dangerous smile that had promised devastation hours ago when this nightmare began, when Amanda had caught them in that guest room and thought that was the worst moment of her life, not realizing her brother had orchestrated something far more comprehensive and permanently destructive. "Samuel," Joseph said quietly, his voice somehow carrying through the chaos with crystalline clarity. "I'd advise you to stop moving toward me right now, because assault charges on top of everything else would just be embarrassing for everyone involved." Samuel froze 3 feet from the stage, his chest heaving, his hands clenched into fists, his expression cycling through rage and panic and dawning comprehension that he had absolutely no power here, no leverage, no defense against truth displayed in high-definition clarity. "This is my wedding," Joseph continued, his tone conversational despite the violence simmering in every syllable. "My celebration. My guests. And you just spent the last 8 months using my family's trust and resources to facilitate an affair with a woman who was supposed to be family. So yes, Samuel, I'm going to show everyone exactly who you are. And there's not a single thing you can do to stop it." Victoria appeared in the doorway behind Samuel, her bridesmaid dress wrinkled beyond any hope of explanation, her carefully styled hair disheveled in ways that told their own story, her makeup smeared exactly like someone who'd been crying or doing other activities that involved significant facial contact. She tried to enter the ballroom but was blocked by her own mother, who'd moved with surprising speed to intercept her daughter before she could contaminate this space further with her presence. "Don't," Victoria's mother said, her voice shaking with rage and shame. "Don't you dare show your face here. Don't you dare try to explain this away with your lies and your tears and your excuses. I taught you better than this. I raised you to be better than this." "Mama, please," Victoria sobbed, and Amanda recognized the performance immediately. The trembling lip, the wide innocent eyes, the tears that appeared on command whenever Victoria needed sympathy or protection or someone to fight her battles. "It's not what it looks like. The footage is edited. They're trying to destroy me because—" "Because what?" her mother demanded, her voice rising loud enough to silence nearby conversations. "Because you betrayed the woman who gave you opportunities? Because you slept with your sister-in-law's husband in her own properties using her own resources? Because you're exactly as manipulative and selfish as I always feared you might become." Victoria's tears intensified, her sobs becoming almost theatrical in their dramatic escalation, her body language shifting into that wounded innocent pose that had worked for her countless times before when consequences approached too close. But this time, the crowd didn't rush to comfort her. This time, they turned away with disgust and contempt. This time, her tears bought nothing except more proof of her manipulation, more evidence that she'd been performing her entire life, always ready with tears whenever reality demanded accountability. "Stop crying," someone called from the crowd, a woman Amanda didn't recognize. "Save it for someone who doesn't have eyes. We all saw what you did. We all saw who you are." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the guests like wind through wheat fields, heads nodding, expressions hardening against Victoria's attempted manipulation, social circles closing ranks against someone who'd revealed herself as fundamentally untrustworthy. The screens continued their relentless display, now showing text message screenshots, hundreds of them, recovered from cloud backups Victoria had thought were secure, conversations dripping with intimate details and casual cruelty about Amanda, about her work habits and her perceived naivety, about how easy she was to manipulate because she genuinely believed in the goodness of people she loved. "Victoria, she actually thinks you're working late, lol. Samuel, let her think whatever keeps her docile. Victoria, when are you going to leave her? Samuel, after I secure the partnership shares. Need to play this smart." Each message appeared on screen for exactly 5 seconds, long enough for guests to read and absorb and feel visceral disgust, short enough to maintain momentum and prevent attention from wandering. Amanda stood motionless near the family table, watching her marriage and her trust and her capacity for vulnerability get systematically destroyed across 8 screens, while 300 witnesses documented everything for social media and group chats and whispered conversations that would define her reputation for years to come. But she didn't cry. Didn't collapse. Didn't give Samuel or Victoria or anyone else the satisfaction of seeing her break publicly. Instead, she lifted her chin with the same dignity she'd carried into hostile boardrooms and contentious negotiations, channeling every ounce of her considerable strength into maintaining composure while her world burned. Samuel turned away from Joseph, recognizing that battle is already lost, and pushed through the crowd toward Amanda with desperate urgency. "Amanda, please," he said, his voice cracking with what might have been genuine emotion or might have been performance. "Please, just let me explain. It's more complicated than." He reached for her arm with familiar presumption, as if he still possessed the right to touch her, as if 8 months of documented betrayal hadn't permanently revoked every privilege he'd once taken for granted. Amanda stepped back smoothly, her body language conveying more revulsion than words ever could, putting physical distance between herself and the man who'd promised forever while planning her systematic betrayal. Their eyes met across 3 feet of charged air. And Amanda felt something inside her chest that had been cracking and fracturing finally shatter completely. Not her heart, but the last remaining thread of connection that had bound her to this man, to this marriage, to the comfortable illusion that love could survive calculated manipulation. She spoke quietly, her voice steady despite the devastation radiating through every cell of her body, each word landing with finality that made Samuel flinch like she'd physically struck him. "We're done." The words hung between them like a death sentence that couldn't be appealed or overturned. "We're done." 2 syllables that dismantled 4 years of marriage, countless promises, and every carefully constructed future Amanda had allowed herself to envision during quiet moments when she'd actually believed in forever. Samuel's face crumpled, whether from genuine emotion or calculated performance. Amanda no longer possessed the energy to decipher. His mouth opened, closed, opened again like a fish drowning in air, searching desperately for words that might somehow reverse the irreversible, might transform documented betrayal into misunderstanding. But there were no words. There was only truth displayed across 8 screens and witnessed by 300 people who would spread the story through their social circles like wildfire consuming dry brush, who would define Amanda's narrative for years as either the woman destroyed by betrayal or the woman who walked away with her dignity intact. She chose dignity. Amanda turned away from her husband, ex-husband, her mind corrected with brutal efficiency, and walked toward the exit with measured steps that betrayed none of the screaming chaos happening inside her chest where her heart was supposed to be. Joseph materialized beside her within seconds, his hand gentle on her elbow, his presence a shield against the stares and whispers and poorly disguised phone cameras documenting her departure for social media consumption and group chat analysis. "I'll take you home," he murmured, already steering her toward the private exit that would spare her the gauntlet of curious guests congregating near the main doors. "Your wedding," Amanda protested weakly, though the words felt hollow and automatic. "Priya understands completely," Joseph assured her. "And honestly, sis, I think we've provided enough entertainment for one evening. The wedding's effectively over anyway. Let them gossip over the open bar while you get the hell out of here." The night air hit Amanda's face like a physical slap when they emerged into the darkness beyond the Riverside Estate's ornate entrance. The temperature had dropped since the ceremony, autumn asserting itself with a kind of cold that settled into bones and reminded humans of their fragility and mortality. Joseph's driver, a discreet man named Marcus who'd worked for their family for 15 years, already had the car waiting, the rear door open, the interior offering sanctuary from judgment and exposure and the overwhelming weight of being perceived by people who would never understand the full scope of what she just survived. "Call me when you get home," Joseph said, pulling her into a fierce embrace that lasted exactly as long as Amanda needed before she could force her spine straight and her composure back into place. "Call me every hour if you need to. Call me at 3 in the morning. I don't care. You're not alone in this." Amanda nodded against his shoulder, not trusting her voice to remain steady if she attempted actual words, then extracted herself and slid into the car's leather interior that smelled like expensive cologne and the faint trace of her mother's perfume from some previous family outing. The door closed with a soft click that sounded like a period at the end of a very long sentence. Marcus pulled away from the estate with practiced smoothness, navigating the curved driveway lined with imported trees and strategic lighting that transformed ordinary landscaping into something magical and romantic, all of it suddenly feeling like elaborate stage dressing for the greatest humiliation of Amanda's carefully constructed life. She watched the venue disappear in the rear window, the glowing windows revealing silhouettes of guests still gathered inside, still processing, still discussing the scandal that would fuel conversations for months across New York's social and professional circles. The city lights blurred past the windows as Marcus navigated toward Amanda's penthouse in Tribeca, that sanctuary she'd purchased 3 years ago and spent months decorating with Samuel's input, selecting furniture and artwork together like the partnership she believed they were building, like the future she'd actually thought they were creating together. Now every piece of furniture would be contaminated with his presence. Every room poisoned with memories of lies told and believed, every corner hiding evidence of her spectacular failure to recognize predators wearing the masks of people she loved. Amanda's phone buzzed repeatedly against her clutch, texts and calls from friends who'd witnessed the exposure, from colleagues who'd already heard through the incredibly efficient gossip network that connected New York's elite, from her mother whose messages cycled between maternal concern and barely restrained fury at Samuel and Victoria for daring to hurt her daughter. She ignored them all. The silence inside the car felt like the only safe space remaining in a world that had revealed itself as fundamentally untrustworthy, as populated by beautiful people wearing beautiful masks while hiding rot and calculation and the kind of casual cruelty that came from viewing other humans as resources to be exploited rather than souls to be cherished. Marcus said nothing during the 40-minute drive, understanding instinctively that his employer's daughter didn't need platitudes or sympathy or questions she couldn't yet answer. He simply drove with steady competence, delivering her safely to her building where the night doorman tactfully pretended not to notice her smeared makeup and haunted expression. The elevator ride to the penthouse felt eternal. The hallway stretched longer than physics should allow. Her key turned in the lock with a sound like finality, like doors closing on chapters that could never be reopened or rewritten. Amanda entered her home, their home, the space they'd shared for 3 years, and felt like an intruder in her own life. Like someone walking through a museum exhibit of who she used to be before truth shattered every comfortable illusion. She made it exactly 5 steps inside before her knees buckled. The sob that tore from her chest sounded animal and wrong, like grief emerging from somewhere deeper than her lungs, somewhere primal where pain lived before language could contain it in manageable syllables. Amanda collapsed onto the imported Italian marble flooring that Samuel had insisted they install, crying with a kind of full-body devastation that couldn't be performed or prettied up for public consumption, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of betrayal that she'd been holding at bay through sheer force of will and desperate dignity. She cried until her throat burned raw. Cried until her carefully applied makeup had completely dissolved. Cried until exhaustion finally dragged her into something resembling sleep there on the cold floor, still wearing her emerald dress, still wearing her armor that had failed to protect her from the people she'd loved most. Morning arrived with the kind of brutal sunlight that felt personal and offensive. Amanda woke on the marble floor with her neck screaming protest and her body aching from hours in an unnatural position, her dress wrinkled beyond recognition, her hair a disaster that would require professional intervention to fix. She dragged herself upright, her reflection in the hallway mirror revealing someone who looked like they'd survived a war, which, she supposed, was accurate enough. The shower ran hot enough to scald, but Amanda welcomed the pain, welcomed anything that felt real and immediate and different from the emotional devastation that was trying to consume her from the inside out. She dressed in comfortable clothing, soft cashmere and loose pants that felt nothing like the armor she wore to boardrooms and galas, nothing like the person she'd been 24 hours ago when she still believed in loyalty and partnership and the fundamental goodness of people who looked her in the eye while lying. The doorbell rang at exactly 9:30. Amanda checked the security camera, expecting her mother or Joseph or possibly one of her well-meaning friends who decided intervention was necessary. Instead, she found Lucas Chen standing in her hallway holding a leather portfolio that looked ominous in ways she couldn't quite articulate. Lucas, the private investigator Joseph had hired 6 months ago, the man who'd compiled the evidence that destroyed her marriage across 8 screens while 300 people watched, the professional who dealt in truth regardless of how devastating that truth might be. Amanda opened the door with the kind of resignation that came from knowing she was about to receive more bad news, from understanding instinctively that the nightmare wasn't over but rather entering a new and possibly worse phase. Ms. Festa, Lucas greeted formally, though his expression carried something that looked uncomfortably close to pity. I know the timing is terrible, but there are things you need to know. Things that couldn't be displayed last night without risking legal complications. More? Amanda asked, and the word came out brittle and sharp. What could possibly be worse than what Joseph already showed? Lucas's jaw tightened in that particular way that meant he was about to deliver information that would hurt, that would fundamentally alter her understanding of reality, that would reveal depths of betrayal she hadn't yet imagined despite surviving last night's public devastation. May I come in? He asked quietly. You're going to want to sit down for this. Amanda stepped aside, allowing him entry into the penthouse that suddenly felt too large and too empty, decorated with furniture she'd selected with a man who'd been calculating her destruction while smiling into her eyes and promising forever. Lucas settled into the leather chair near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, his portfolio resting on his knees, his expression that of someone who'd seen humanity's worst impulses and learned to deliver terrible news with clinical efficiency. The affair has been ongoing for approximately 14 months, Lucas began without preamble, apparently deciding that gentle lead-ins were unnecessary given everything Amanda had already survived. Not the 8 months shown last night. 14 months of documented contact, meeting coordination, and resource exploitation. 14 months. More than a year of lies told over breakfast and dinner and in bed during those increasingly rare moments when Samuel bothered with physical intimacy that Amanda had attributed to work stress rather than recognizing as evidence of attention divided and affection redirected. Lucas opened his portfolio, revealing documents printed on expensive paper, organized with tabs and highlights that suggested hundreds of hours of meticulous investigation and evidence compilation. Hotel receipts paid in cash to avoid digital trails, he continued, sliding the first set of documents across the coffee table. 23 different establishments across 8 cities, always booked under false names, always paid with bills that can't be traced back to bank accounts or credit cards. Amanda picked up the receipts with numb fingers, scanning dates and locations that corresponded to Samuel's supposed business trips and legal conferences, to weekends when he'd claimed urgent client emergencies that couldn't wait until Monday, to all those convenient absences she'd accepted without question because she trusted her husband to tell her truth. They used burner phones for communication, Lucas said, producing another set of documents. Multiple devices purchased with cash, used for coordination, and then discarded when they feared detection. We recovered the digital records through cell tower triangulation and service provider subpoenas. The text message logs were extensive, hundreds of exchanges revealing logistics and intimacy in equal measure, planning their meetings with a kind of detailed coordination that suggested this wasn't passion overwhelming judgment but rather calculated affair management with risk mitigation strategies. Samuel used your corporate credit card for expenses he categorized as business development, Lucas continued relentlessly. Hotel rooms where he met Victoria. Restaurants where they dined while you believed he was negotiating contracts. Even the gifts he gave her, jewelry, clothing, electronics, all charged to accounts you provided access to because you believed in supporting his career growth. Each revelation landed like physical blows, systematically destroying not just her marriage but her understanding of the past year, forcing her to recontextualize every memory through this devastating new lens that revealed calculation where she perceived partnership. Victoria exploited her position as your assistant to access proprietary information, Lucas said, his voice softening slightly as if recognizing that Amanda's capacity for absorbing devastating news had limits that were rapidly approaching. Client lists, strategic plans, financial projections. She photographed documents during late nights at your office and shared them with Samuel, who used that information for his own firm's competitive advantage. Corporate espionage, Amanda whispered, feeling something cold settle into her chest alongside the grief. They weren't just having an affair. They were stealing from me. Yes, Lucas confirmed simply. And there's more. More. Of course there was more. Because apparently the universe had decided Amanda's capacity for suffering needed thorough testing, needed to discover exactly how much devastation one person could absorb before shattering completely. Lucas hesitated for the first time since arriving, his professional composure cracking slightly to reveal what looked like genuine reluctance to continue, like someone who'd uncovered truth so ugly, he almost wished he could protect her from knowing. Amanda, he said slowly, deliberately, each word weighted with significance that made her pulse accelerate with dread. Samuel didn't fall into this affair accidentally. The timeline suggests something far more calculated. He pulled out a final document, this one appearing different from the others, older somehow, printed on paper that looked like it had been photographed from archived materials. "We found emails dating back to before you and Samuel met," Lucas said, and his voice carried the kind of careful gentleness reserved for delivering news that would fundamentally shatter someone's understanding of their own life story. "Correspondence between Samuel and a business associate discussing your net worth, your company's valuation, your position in New York social and professional networks." Amanda's hands had gone cold. Her breathing had become shallow. Because she understood what Lucas was about to say before he said it, understood with horrible clarity what this meant, what it revealed about the foundation of her entire marriage. Lucas met her eyes with something that looked like apology and fury combined. "Amanda. Samuel didn't fall into this. He planned you." The words hung in the air like poison gas, slowly filling the room, contaminating every memory, every moment, every carefully constructed belief Amanda had built about her marriage and her judgment and her capacity to recognize predators wearing the masks of people who claimed to love her. "Samuel didn't fall into this. He planned you." Lucas slid the first email across the coffee table with the careful precision of someone handling evidence in a murder trial, which, Amanda supposed with horrible clarity, was exactly what this was. The murder of trust. The murder of 4 years of her life. The murder of the woman she'd been before understanding that she'd been targeted, studied, and systematically dismantled by someone who'd viewed her as a business opportunity rather than a human being deserving of genuine affection. The email was dated 5 years ago, 7 months before she'd met Samuel at her foundation's annual literacy gala, back when she still believed in serendipity and romantic timing and the comfortable fiction that love arrived through chance rather than calculation. From Samuel.Morrison@morrison-legal.com to David.Chen@strategicwealth.com. Subject: High-value target analysis. David. I've completed the preliminary research on Amanda Festa. Net worth estimated between $340 to $380 million, with the bulk in tech sector holdings and commercial real estate. Her company, Festa Innovations, has grown 340% in the last 3 years, with expansion projections suggesting continued exponential growth. She's single, no children, minimal family complications beyond one younger brother. Parents are comfortable but not wealthy. She's entirely self-made, which suggests both ambition and potential insecurity about maintaining her position. Most importantly, she's actively seeking partnership. Her interviews consistently mention wanting to build a family, wanting someone who understands the pressure of her position. She's lonely at the top, David. And lonely people make decisions with their hearts instead of their heads. The Literacy Gala next month provides perfect entry. I've already secured an invitation through the Peterson connection. We'll report back after initial contact. Samuel. Amanda's hands trembled as she read and reread the email, each passed through the clinical language revealing new layers of manipulation and calculated predation. He'd studied her like a corporate acquisition target. He'd identified her vulnerabilities, loneliness, desire for partnership, the fundamental decency that made her want to believe in people's goodness, and weaponized them with strategic precision. There are 43 more emails like this, Lucas said quietly, his professional composure cracking slightly to reveal what looked like genuine anger on Amanda's behalf. Spanning 7 months of research, planning, and strategic positioning before he ever spoke to you at that gala. He produced another document, this one a printed screenshot from what appeared to be a private financial database that definitely shouldn't have been accessible to random lawyers researching potential romantic targets. He obtained copies of your company's financial statements, Lucas continued. Not the public filings that anyone can access, but internal documents showing profit margins, client contracts, expansion plans. He paid someone in your accounting department, we're still tracking down who, to provide quarterly reports for 6 months before approaching you. The financial statements were annotated in Samuel's handwriting, notes about revenue streams, observations about which business sectors showed the most growth potential, calculations about what percentage of her wealth might be accessible through marriage depending on prenuptial agreement structuring. He'd studied her company the way hostile takeover specialists studied acquisition targets, looking for weaknesses and opportunities and access points that could be exploited for maximum profit extraction. The gala wasn't an accident, Amanda whispered, though the words felt like they were being spoken by someone else, by some distant version of herself who could still be shocked by evidence of premeditation when everything else had already been revealed as performance and calculation. He engineered the introduction. Down to the smallest detail, Lucas confirmed. He researched your favorite authors through your public interviews and social media. Memorized quotes from the books you'd mentioned loving. Positioned himself exactly where you'd see him during the silent auction for literacy programs, the cause you're most passionate about defending. Amanda remembered that night with horrible clarity now, seeing it through this devastating new lens that transformed romance into calculated manipulation. Samuel standing near the display of first-edition classic novels, looking sophisticated and slightly out of place in ways that made him interesting rather than suspicious. Their conversation about Toni Morrison and James Baldwin flowing with a kind of natural chemistry that made her feel seen and understood and less alone in rooms full of people who wanted things from her rather than connection with her. He'd quoted her favorite passage from Beloved perfectly. She'd thought it was serendipity. It had been research. He cultivated the relationship with deliberate pacing, Lucas said, pulling out another set of documents that appeared to be journal entries or planning notes written in Samuel's precise handwriting. Waited exactly 2 weeks before calling you, long enough to seem respectful and not desperate, short enough to maintain the initial connection. Plan date activities based on your social media posts and interview mentions. Mirrored your communication style and values in ways designed to create the illusion of perfect compatibility. The journal entries were clinical in their calculation. Week 3 took her to the independent bookstore she mentioned in her Forbes profile. She responded positively to the thoughtful attention to detail. Note: continue demonstrating that I listen and remember specifics. Week 8 introduced topic of marriage and family. She became visibly emotional discussing her desire for partnership. Vulnerability noted, can be leveraged for accelerated timeline. Month 4 proposed casually introducing prenup discussion through concern for protecting what she's built. Frame it as respecting her accomplishments rather than protecting my interests. She responded exactly as predicted, grateful for the consideration, willing to negotiate favorable terms. Each entry revealed another layer of manipulation, another moment she'd interpreted as genuine connection that had actually been strategic positioning by someone who viewed their relationship as a long-term investment opportunity with projected returns. Lucas produced another document, this one appearing more official, formatted like legal correspondence with timestamps and formal letterhead. 6 weeks before your wedding, he said, and his voice carried the weight of delivering the final devastating blow in a series of increasingly horrible revelations. Samuel met with a divorce attorney. The transcript read like a battle plan. Attorney: so you're getting married in 6 weeks, but you want to discuss divorce strategy now? Samuel: I want to understand the prenup's vulnerabilities. My fiancé has significant assets. I need to know what percentage I can reasonably claim if the marriage ends. Attorney: the prenup you described is fairly comprehensive. You'd likely walk away with minimal settlement unless you can prove coercion, emotional abuse, or demonstrate that you contributed substantially to her business growth during the marriage. Samuel: what about infidelity claims? If she violates the fidelity clause, does that invalidate my rights to contested assets? Attorney: actually, infidelity clauses work both ways. If you're unfaithful, you forfeit even the minimal settlement protections. Samuel: noted. What if I document contributions to her business, strategic advice, networking connections, operational support? Build a case for economic partnership even with the prenup in place? Attorney: that could work, but you'd need substantial documentation over several years. This is long-term strategy we're discussing. Samuel: I'm comfortable with long-term planning. Amanda's vision blurred as she read through the transcript once, twice, 3 times, each pass revealing new dimensions of betrayal that somehow managed to be worse than everything that came before. He'd married her while already planning their divorce. He'd stood at that altar speaking vows he had no intention of honoring, making promises he was already strategizing to break, looking into her eyes while calculating exactly how much money he could extract from her trust and her love and her fundamental belief in the goodness of people who claimed to cherish her. He wasn't just unfaithful, Amanda said, and her voice sounded strange in her own ears, flat and distant and terrifyingly calm, like all the emotion had been burned out of her by the sustained heat of revelation after revelation after revelation. He married me specifically to position himself for wealth extraction. I was never a wife to him. I was never a partner. I was a mark. Yes, Lucas confirmed simply, apparently recognizing that gentle euphemisms were unnecessary and possibly insulting given the clinical evidence laid out across Amanda's coffee table. The silence that followed felt different from the shocked numbness of previous revelations. This was something colder, something that settled into Amanda's bones with the weight of fundamental truth that would reshape how she understood herself and her judgment and her capacity to recognize predators for the rest of her life. She didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't collapse into dramatic grief that might provide cathartic release or emotional satisfaction. Instead, she sat perfectly still in her designer furniture surrounded by artwork she'd selected with a man who'd been studying her for profit margins, feeling something deep inside her chest go completely, utterly, terrifyingly quiet. Not her heart breaking. Hearts broke with noise and drama and theatrical suffering that demanded acknowledgement. This was different. This was every warm impulse toward trust and vulnerability, and believing in people's capacity for genuine love, simultaneously hardening into something that would never soften again, calcifying into permanent scar tissue that might protect her but would also prevent her from ever being quite as open or hopeful or fundamentally decent as she'd been before, understanding that decency could be weaponized by people who viewed kindness as exploitable weakness. Ms. Festa, Lucas said carefully, apparently recognizing that he was witnessing something that looked calm on the surface but suggested dangerous undercurrents beneath. Are you? The knock on her door interrupted whatever well-meaning question he'd been preparing to ask. Amanda stood mechanically, crossing her penthouse with steady steps that betrayed none of the screaming void where her ability to trust her own judgment used to exist, and opened the door without checking the security camera because nothing else could possibly hurt her today, nothing else could possibly make this worse. Joseph stood in her hallway looking like he'd barely slept, still wearing yesterday's tuxedo pants and white shirt with a tie long since discarded, his hair disheveled and his eyes blazing with a kind of protective fury that made him look simultaneously younger and more dangerous than the polished groom who'd orchestrated last night's public devastation. I know, he said without preamble, apparently reading her expression with a brotherly intuition that came from decades of shared experiences and mutual protection. Lucas called me an hour ago. I know about the emails, the planning, the lawyer meeting. I know Samuel targeted you from the beginning like you were a fucking corporate acquisition instead of a human being deserving of actual love. He pushed past her into the penthouse, his presence filling the space with a kind of barely restrained violence that suggested he was seconds away from tracking Samuel down and delivering the kind of justice that couldn't be accomplished through legal proceedings and social exposure alone. Joseph, Amanda started, but her voice cracked on his name, and suddenly the terrifying calm that had been protecting her from complete collapse shattered into something rawer and more honest. He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into a fierce embrace that felt like the only solid thing remaining in a world that had revealed itself as fundamentally untrustworthy and populated by beautiful monsters wearing human faces. He played me, Amanda whispered against her brother's shoulder, finally allowing herself to voice the most devastating truth of all. Every moment, every conversation, every time I thought we were building something real, he was executing a plan. I was never his wife. I was his long-term investment strategy. I know, Joseph said, and his voice carried the kind of cold fury that suggested he'd already started planning retribution that would extend far beyond last night's public exposure. And he's going to pay for that, sis. He's going to pay for every calculation, every manipulated moment, every second he spent pretending to love you while plotting how to profit from your trust. Amanda pulled back slightly, looking up at her brother with eyes that felt raw and burned out from sustained exposure to devastating truth. How? The prenup protects him from losing more than minimal settlement. The legal system doesn't punish emotional manipulation. He'll walk away from this relatively unscathed except for social embarrassment that will fade in 6 months when some new scandal captures everyone's attention. Joseph's smile transformed into something predatory and absolutely terrifying in its controlled precision, the same expression he'd worn last night before destroying Samuel and Victoria's reputations across 8 screens while 300 witnesses documented everything for permanent digital immortality. The prenup protects him from financial liability in divorce proceedings, Joseph agreed. But it doesn't protect him from the consequences of corporate espionage, fraud, and strategic theft of proprietary information. And it definitely doesn't protect him from what happens when I systematically dismantle his professional reputation across every legal circle and business network where he thought his charm and manipulation could continue working indefinitely. He moved to Amanda's windows overlooking the city, his posture radiating the kind of calm determination that came from someone who'd been planning comprehensive destruction for far longer than anyone realized. "I've been documenting everything for 2 years," Joseph said quietly. "Not 6 months. 2 years. From the moment I first suspected Samuel wasn't who he pretended to be, I started building a case that would survive any legal challenge and destroy any narrative he tried constructing about being the victim in this situation." Amanda's exhausted mind struggled to process this new information, to understand that her brother had been running a counter-operation for twice as long as she'd known about the affair, that he'd been protecting her through strategic evidence gathering while she'd been living in ignorant trust. 2 years, she whispered. 2 years, Joseph confirmed. "And I have everything, Amanda. Financial records proving he siphoned money through shell companies. Evidence of him leveraging your business connections for his firm's advantage. Documentation of every single time he used your resources while planning your eventual exploitation. And most importantly, proof that Victoria wasn't just his affair partner but his active accomplice in corporate espionage." He turned back to face his sister, his expression fierce with protective determination. "So let him try to fight," Joseph said, and his voice carried the weight of someone who'd been preparing for exactly this war for years. "Let him claim he's the victim. Let him try spinning narratives about your supposed controlling behavior or emotional manipulation. I've been preparing for this moment since I first realized what he was, and I promise you, when I'm done, Samuel Morrison won't be able to practice law in any jurisdiction that matters. He won't be able to show his face at any professional gathering without people remembering exactly what he is." The word settled into Amanda's chest alongside the devastation, not quite hope but something close enough, the understanding that she wasn't alone in this, that her brother had been fighting for her protection long before she'd known she needed protecting, that Samuel's calculations hadn't accounted for the one variable he couldn't manipulate or deceive: Joseph's absolute loyalty to his sister, and his willingness to burn down anyone who dared to hurt her. The lawsuit arrived exactly 72 hours after Joseph's wedding, delivered by professional courier to Amanda's office during a board meeting where she was attempting to project competence and stability, while her entire personal life burned in spectacular public fashion across social media and gossip columns. Her assistant knocked softly, her expression carrying the particular combination of sympathy and morbid curiosity that had become familiar since the wedding night exposure, and handed Amanda the envelope with hands that trembled slightly. Amanda excused herself from the boardroom with the kind of practiced composure that had become her default setting, walked calmly to her private office overlooking Manhattan's glittering skyline, closed the door, and opened the envelope with fingers that remained perfectly steady despite the dread pooling in her stomach like cold poison. Morrison v. Festa. Complaint for emotional abuse, coercion, and financial manipulation. The words blurred slightly as Amanda scanned the document, each paragraph more outrageous than the last, each claim more audacious in its reversal of reality and truth. Samuel's legal team, and he'd hired expensive representation, Amanda noted with bitter irony, probably using money he'd siphoned from their joint accounts before she'd frozen everything, had constructed a narrative so completely inverted from reality that it would have been laughable if it weren't potentially devastating to her reputation and company. According to the 47-page complaint, Amanda Festa was a controlling, manipulative billionaire who had used her wealth and power to trap Samuel Morrison in an emotionally abusive marriage where he'd been systematically isolated from friends and family, coerced into signing a prenuptial agreement under duress, and forced to perform the role of devoted husband while suffering silent psychological torture. Plaintiff Samuel Morrison entered into marriage with defendant Amanda Festa believing in partnership and mutual respect. Instead, he found himself trapped in a relationship characterized by defendant's need for absolute control over all aspects of his personal and professional life. Defendant leveraged her superior financial position to coerce plaintiff into signing a prenuptial agreement that was grossly inequitable and signed under conditions of extreme emotional pressure. Plaintiff was given less than 48 hours to review the document and was threatened with cancellation of the wedding, after invitations had been sent and expenses incurred, if he refused to sign. Throughout the marriage, defendant used her wealth to manipulate and control plaintiff, demanding constant access to his location, interrogating him about his professional activities, and creating an environment of surveillance and suspicion that caused severe emotional distress. The recent public humiliation orchestrated by defendant and her brother Joseph Festa at what should have been a private family celebration constitutes intentional infliction of emotional distress, defamation, and violation of plaintiff's reasonable expectation of privacy. Amanda read through the entire complaint twice, her legal training allowing her to identify the strategic manipulation embedded in every carefully worded claim, the way Samuel's attorneys had taken kernels of actual events and twisted them into unrecognizable distortions. The prenup she'd suggested to protect the company she'd built before meeting him? Coercion and control. The normal questions about his late nights that any spouse might ask? Surveillance and interrogation. The public exposure of his documented affair and calculated manipulation? Emotional abuse and defamation. He was playing the victim. And his attorneys had crafted the narrative with enough plausibility that people who didn't know the full truth, which was most of the world, might actually believe it. The lawsuit demanded dissolution of the prenuptial agreement, equitable distribution of assets acquired during the marriage, compensation for emotional distress totaling $15 million, and public apology from both Amanda and Joseph for the malicious character assassination conducted at the wedding reception. Amanda's phone buzzed with incoming calls before she'd finished reading. Her corporate attorney, her PR team, her mother whose voice messages cycled between maternal fury and practical concern about media strategy. But it was the email from her head of communications that made Amanda's blood run cold. Amanda, we have a problem. Samuel's team went to the media before filing. TMZ, Page 6, and 3 major networks already running his version. His interview with Rachel Morrison airs tonight at 8. We need to respond immediately. Of course he'd gone to the media first. Of course he'd secured sympathetic coverage before the legal papers were even served. Because Samuel Morrison understood that public opinion mattered more than courtroom facts, that the first narrative to gain traction would shape how millions of people interpreted the evidence, that positioning himself as the victim of a controlling billionaire woman would resonate with existing biases about powerful women and the men they supposedly emasculate. Amanda pulled up TMZ on her computer, her stomach churning as she scanned the headline. Billionaire tech mogul accused of emotional abuse, husband claims years of control and manipulation. The article included a photo of Samuel looking devastated and sympathetic, hair slightly disheveled, eyes red-rimmed like he'd been crying, expression radiating wounded innocence, alongside a photo of Amanda from a business magazine cover where she looked powerful, intimidating, and completely lacking in warmth or vulnerability. The visual storytelling was deliberate and devastatingly effective. The comment section was already filling with reactions. Rich women think they can control men with their money. Good for him fighting back. She probably did manipulate him. Look at her, cold as ice. Finally, someone calling out these billionaire bosses who treat people like property. The way she exposed him at that wedding was cruel. He's the victim here. Public opinion was shifting with terrifying speed, the narrative that had briefly cast Amanda as the dignified woman betrayed by calculating predators now transforming into something uglier, the controlling businesswoman who trapped a good man in an abusive marriage and destroyed him publicly when he dared to seek comfort elsewhere. Her office phone rang. Joseph's name flashed across the screen. "Tell me you've seen it," he said without preamble, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "I'm reading the complaint now," Amanda responded, surprised by how steady her voice remained when everything inside her felt like it was collapsing. "He's claiming I emotionally abused him. That I coerced him into the prenup. That the wedding exposure was malicious defamation. He's playing the victim card," Joseph spat. "And people are buying it. My phone's been ringing non-stop, journalists wanting my comment, business associates asking if the allegations have merit, even some of Mom and Dad's friends expressing concern about whether we went too far at the wedding." Amanda closed her eyes, feeling the weight of public perception shifting like tectonic plates beneath her carefully constructed reputation. She'd survived hostile takeovers and competitive markets and male executives who'd tried dismantling her credibility. But this was different. This was personal warfare conducted through media manipulation and legal maneuvering, and Samuel had struck first with devastating effectiveness. "There's more," Joseph continued grimly. "Victoria released a video an hour ago. It's already got 2 million views. What kind of video? The crying kind. The "I'm just a victim of a powerful woman's rage" kind. She's claiming you threatened her, that you've been systematically destroying her reputation because you're jealous of her relationship with Samuel, that the affair was actually them finding genuine love in the face of your controlling behavior. Amanda pulled up Victoria's Instagram with trembling fingers, finding the video pinned at the top of her feed. Victoria in soft lighting wearing minimal makeup that somehow made her look more sympathetic, her eyes red and swollen, her voice breaking with carefully calibrated emotion. "I never wanted any of this," Victoria said to the camera, tears streaming down her face in a performance that would have earned standing ovations in legitimate theater. "Amanda was like a sister to me. I admired her, looked up to her, wanted to be like her. But she became obsessed with controlling everyone around her, including Samuel. When Samuel and I developed feelings for each other, it wasn't planned. It wasn't malicious. We were two people finding comfort and understanding while dealing with someone who used her money and power to manipulate and control." Amanda couldn't accept that Samuel might have emotional needs she wasn't meeting, that he might find connection with someone who actually listened to him without judgment. What she did at Joseph's wedding, exposing private moments, destroying Samuel's reputation in front of hundreds of people, that wasn't justice. That was revenge from a woman who can't handle not being in complete control of everyone in her life. The video continued for 7 minutes, Victoria painting herself as the misunderstood woman who'd fallen in love with a man trapped in an emotionally abusive marriage, suggesting that Amanda's wealth and power had corrupted her into someone who viewed people as possessions rather than partners. The comments were overwhelmingly sympathetic. "She's so brave for speaking out. Rich people think they own everyone. Good for Victoria standing up to that bully. Amanda sounds like a nightmare. No wonder Samuel looked elsewhere for actual love. This is what happens when women get too much power, they become monsters." Amanda felt physically ill reading the responses, watching in real time as public opinion crystallized around a narrative so completely divorced from truth that it felt like living in an alternate reality where facts didn't matter and whoever told their story first with the most emotional manipulation won regardless of evidence. Her phone buzzed with a text from her head of PR. "Company stock down 3.4% since the lawsuit news broke. Board wants emergency meeting. Investors asking questions about your stability and judgment. This is becoming a crisis." 3.4% translated to roughly $12 million in vanished market capitalization. Money evaporating because Samuel had successfully positioned himself as victim and her as villain, because perception mattered more than truth in markets driven by confidence and reputation. "Amanda." Joseph's voice pulled her back to their phone conversation. "Are you still there?" "I'm here," she said quietly. "I'm just watching everything I've built threatened because my ex-husband is a talented liar and people want to believe that powerful women are secretly monsters." "Then we fight back," Joseph said fiercely. "We release the evidence Lucas gathered. We show everyone exactly what Samuel is, a calculating predator who targeted you specifically for your wealth, who planned this manipulation years before marrying you, who met with divorce attorneys before the wedding even happened." "And if they don't believe it?" Amanda asked, voicing the fear that had been growing since reading Samuel's complaint. "If they decide that evidence can be fabricated or misinterpreted? If the narrative is already set and facts won't change it?" The silence on the other end lasted too long, suggesting Joseph was grappling with the same terrifying possibility, that truth might not matter, that Samuel's first strike strategy might have been so effective that no amount of evidence could shift public opinion back to reality. "Then we find better evidence," Joseph finally said. "Evidence so damning that even his most sympathetic supporters can't ignore it. Evidence that destroys his victim narrative so completely that he can't reconstruct it." Amanda wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that justice would prevail and truth would triumph and the legal system would recognize manipulation when presented with documentation. But she'd spent years in corporate environments where she'd watched guilty men walk free through superior legal maneuvering and innocent people destroyed by strategic narrative control. A knock on her office door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Lucas Chen entered without waiting for invitation, his expression carrying that particular intensity that meant he'd found something significant, something that might shift the balance in a war that felt increasingly unwinnable. "I need both of you on this call," Lucas said, his voice urgent as he activated the speakerphone function. "I've been working non-stop since Samuel's lawsuit dropped, and—" He paused, seemingly for dramatic effect or possibly to ensure they were both fully paying attention to what came next. Joseph's voice crackled through the speaker. "Lucas, whatever you found, it better be good. We're drowning in bad press and public opinion is turning against Amanda faster than we can counter it." "Oh, it's good," Lucas said, and something in his tone made Amanda's pulse accelerate with what might have been hope or might have been just more anxiety about whatever devastating revelation was coming next. "It's better than good. It's case-ending, reputation-destroying, put Samuel Morrison in actual legal jeopardy kind of good." He placed a folder on Amanda's desk, thicker than the previous ones, organized with a kind of meticulous tabbing that suggested hundreds of hours of investigation and evidence compilation. "Samuel's making a critical mistake with this lawsuit," Lucas continued. "He's claiming emotional abuse and coercion, which requires him to paint himself as the victim throughout the entire marriage. But to maintain that narrative, he has to explain away all the evidence of his calculating behavior, the affair, the corporate espionage, the financial manipulation. And he can't," Amanda said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. "Because the evidence is too comprehensive." "Exactly," Lucas confirmed. "But that's not even the best part. While Samuel's been busy crafting his victim narrative and coaching Victoria through her tearful social media performance, I've been digging into his financial records from before you met him." He opened the folder, revealing bank statements and transaction records dating back 6 years. "Samuel Morrison has done this before," Lucas said, and his voice carried the weight of someone delivering information that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of everything that came next. "Not once. Not twice. 3 times over the past 8 years, he's targeted wealthy women, cultivated relationships with them, married them or gotten engaged, and then extracted money through legal settlements or direct manipulation before moving on to the next target." Amanda's breath caught in her throat. "He has a pattern," Lucas continued, his finger tracing transaction records that showed large deposits following the dissolution of previous relationships. Jennifer Caldwell, tech executive in San Francisco, paid him $800,000 in 2016 to settle harassment claims after a 6-month relationship. Rebecca Torres, real estate developer in Chicago, paid him $1.2 million in 2018 after he threatened to expose private details about her business practices. And Catherine Zhang, venture capitalist in Seattle, paid him $650,000 in 2020 to avoid a lawsuit claiming she'd stolen his business ideas. "He's a professional con artist," Joseph breathed. "He targets successful women, manipulates them into relationships, and then extorts money by threatening their reputations." "And Amanda was supposed to be his biggest score," Lucas said grimly. "The prenup complicated his plans, but he adapted, spending years positioning himself to challenge it, gathering Victoria as an accomplice to help with corporate espionage, building a victim narrative he could deploy when the time came to extract maximum settlement." Amanda stared at the evidence spread across her desk, feeling something cold and sharp solidify in her chest where devastation had been trying to consume her. This wasn't just about her failed marriage anymore. This was about stopping a predator who'd been systematically targeting and exploiting women for years, who'd refined his manipulation tactics through practice and repetition, who'd viewed her as just another mark in a long-term criminal enterprise. "We have testimony from 2 of his previous targets willing to go on record," Lucas continued. "Jennifer Caldwell is particularly eager to speak out. She's been tracking Samuel's subsequent relationships and was horrified when she realized he was targeting you. She's prepared to detail his exact manipulation tactics, the threats he used, the way he positioned himself as the victim while actually being the predator." "This changes everything," Joseph said, and Amanda could hear the fierce satisfaction in his voice. "Samuel can't maintain his victim narrative when faced with evidence of serial predation. His lawsuit becomes proof of his pattern, using legal system to threaten and manipulate successful women into paying him." Lucas nodded, pulling out one final document from the folder. "And there's one more thing," he said, placing what appeared to be a formal legal document on top of the other evidence. Catherine Zhang, his 2020 target, didn't just pay him to go away. She hired investigators who built a comprehensive case but decided not to pursue it because she wanted to avoid public scandal. She's been sitting on evidence for 3 years. What kind of evidence? Amanda asked, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted to know what else Samuel had done, what other depths of manipulation and predation he was capable of achieving. Lucas met her eyes with an expression that suggested he was about to deliver the killing blow, the evidence that would end Samuel's counterattack before it could gain more traction and destroy her reputation beyond repair. Wire fraud, mail fraud, and extortion charges, he said quietly. Federal crimes with statutes of limitation that haven't expired. Catherine Zhang is prepared to turn over everything to prosecutors if Samuel continues this lawsuit against you. She's been waiting for the right moment to stop him from victimizing anyone else. The silence that followed felt different from previous silences, not shocked or devastated but charged with the possibility of actual justice, of consequences that matched crimes, of a predator finally facing accountability for years of calculated harm. We found the evidence to end him, Lucas said, and the words landed like a verdict, like a promise, like the beginning of the end of Samuel Morrison's carefully constructed victim narrative and his years of successful predation against women who'd made the mistake of believing in his performance of genuine affection. The press conference was scheduled for precisely 10 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, prime news cycle timing when journalists were hungry for content and social media engagement peaked as millions scrolled through morning coffee and commute routines. Amanda stood backstage at the Tribeca Conference Center her company used for major product launches, wearing a navy suit that projected competence and authority without the intimidating power that Samuel's narrative had weaponized against her. Her PR team had spent 3 hours preparing talking points, but Amanda had ultimately discarded the carefully crafted script in favor of something more direct, more honest, more devastating. She was done playing defense. Lucas Chen stood beside her, holding a tablet loaded with evidence that would systematically dismantle Samuel's victim narrative piece by methodical piece. Joseph occupied her other side, his presence radiating protective fury barely contained beneath expensive tailoring and calculated composure. The room's packed, her communications director reported, peering through the stage curtain at the assembly of journalists, cameras, and curious observers who'd been promised significant revelations regarding the Morrison Festa lawsuit. All major networks. Print media. Several independent journalists who've been covering the story. And she paused, her expression suggesting she was about to deliver information Amanda might not want to hear. Samuel's attorneys are here. Third row, left side. Good, Amanda thought with cold satisfaction. Let them watch their carefully constructed narrative collapse in real time. She stepped onto the stage at exactly 10 a.m., the camera flashes creating a strobe effect that would have been disorienting if she hadn't spent years navigating hostile press conferences and contentious shareholder meetings where every word was analyzed for weakness or vulnerability. The room fell silent with impressive speed, dozens of journalists simultaneously recognizing that whatever came next would be significant, would shift the story's trajectory, would provide the kind of explosive content that drove clicks and ratings and career-advancing bylines. "Thank you for coming," Amanda began, her voice steady and clear as it carried through the conference center's professional sound system. "I'm not going to waste your time with preamble or prepared statements designed to obscure truth with careful language. Instead, I'm going to show you evidence. And then I'm going to let you decide who's actually the victim in this situation." She nodded to Lucas, who activated the massive screen behind her. The first image that appeared was the transcript from Samuel's meeting with the divorce attorney, the one that had taken place 6 weeks before their wedding, where he'd strategized about challenging the prenup and maximizing his financial extraction from their eventual dissolution. The timestamp was clearly visible. The law firm's letterhead authentic and easily verifiable. The content damning in ways that required no interpretation or spin. Gasps rippled through the assembled journalists as they read Samuel's own words strategizing how to exploit loopholes in a prenuptial agreement he hadn't even signed yet, discussing long-term planning for a divorce he was contemplating before even speaking his wedding vows. "Samuel Morrison claims he was coerced into signing our prenuptial agreement under duress," Amanda said, her voice cutting through the murmurs with clinical precision. "This transcript proves he was actually planning to challenge that agreement months before signing it. He wasn't a victim of my manipulation. He was a predator calculating his eventual extraction strategy." The next slide showed emails between Samuel and his business associate, the ones where he'd researched Amanda's net worth, identified her vulnerabilities, planned his strategic approach to their initial meeting at the literacy gala. "He didn't fall in love with me," Amanda continued, feeling something cold and sharp settle permanently in her chest where warmth and trust used to exist. He targeted me. He studied me like a corporate acquisition. He engineered our meeting, cultivated our relationship, and married me as part of a long-term investment strategy. Camera flashes intensified. Journalists frantically typed notes. Samuel's attorneys sat rigid in their seats, their expressions cycling through shock and dawning horror as they realized their client had lied to them, had positioned himself as victim while actually being calculating predator. Lucas advanced to the next evidence set, bank records showing Samuel's previous settlements with Jennifer Caldwell, Rebecca Torres, and Catherine Zhang. Samuel Morrison has done this before, Amanda said, and her voice carried the weight of someone who'd survived predation and was now ensuring the predator faced consequences. 3 times over 8 years, he's targeted successful women, manipulated them into relationships, and extracted money through legal threats and reputation destruction. I was supposed to be his biggest score. The room erupted into chaos, shouted questions, demands for comment, journalists already filing breaking news alerts that would shift public narrative with the speed of digital wildfire. But Amanda wasn't finished. Victoria Chun, the woman who released a tearful video claiming to be a victim of my controlling behavior, was not just an affair partner. She was an active accomplice in corporate espionage, using access I granted her to photograph proprietary documents and share them with Samuel for his firm's competitive advantage. Evidence flashed across the screen. Photographs Victoria had taken of Amanda's confidential files, text messages coordinating information transfer, financial records showing payments from Samuel's firm to Victoria's personal accounts in amounts that far exceeded any legitimate consulting fees. She didn't fall in love, Amanda concluded. She participated in calculated theft masked as romance. The press conference continued for 47 minutes, Lucas methodically presenting evidence while Amanda provided context, answering questions with a kind of direct honesty that left no room for sympathetic reinterpretation of Samuel's manipulation tactics. By the time she walked off stage, social media had already begun its brutal reversal. The same platforms that had championed Samuel's victim narrative 24 hours ago now flooded with outraged reactions to evidence of serial predation and calculated manipulation. Holy shit! He planned the divorce before the wedding? This man is a professional con artist. Those poor women. And Victoria was his accomplice? That crying video was complete manipulation. Amanda's not the villain. She's the survivor who finally exposed a predator. Within 3 hours, major news networks had completely reversed their coverage. The sympathetic interviews with Samuel were replaced with investigative pieces exploring his pattern of targeting and exploiting successful women. Legal analysts discussed potential criminal charges. Jennifer Caldwell appeared on CNN describing Samuel's manipulation tactics with a kind of detailed credibility that demolished any remaining doubt about his predatory nature. By evening, the media landscape had transformed so completely that Samuel's victim narrative existed only as evidence of his manipulation skills rather than actual reflection of reality. But the most devastating blow came from an unexpected source. At 6 p.m. Priya Festa, Joseph's elegant bride, who'd remained carefully silent throughout the escalating scandal, released a video that made Victoria's tearful performance look like amateur theater by comparison. Priya sat in simple, natural lighting wearing casual clothing that suggested authenticity rather than performance. No tears. No dramatic emotion. Just calm, devastating truth delivered with a kind of composure that commanded attention and belief. "My name is Priya Festa," she began, her voice steady and clear. "Many of you know me as Joseph's wife. Some of you know me as Victoria Chen's sister. And I need to tell you some things about Victoria that I've kept quiet for far too long out of misguided family loyalty." She paused, her expression radiating the kind of regret that came from protecting someone who'd proven unworthy of that protection. "Victoria has been stealing from family members for 6 years," Priya continued. "She borrowed $45,000 from Joseph under the pretense of starting a legitimate business. She never paid it back. She never started the business. She used that money for luxury purchases and travel while telling everyone she was successfully building her career." The evidence appeared on screen behind Priya: loan documents signed by Victoria, bank records showing the money spent on designer goods rather than business expenses, text messages where Victoria promised repayment she never intended to provide. She stole jewelry from our mother valued at over $30,000, Priya said, her voice hardening slightly. Pieces that had been in our family for generations. She claimed they were lost, but we later found them listed for sale on luxury consignment websites under false names. More evidence. Photographs of the jewelry. Listings with metadata proving Victoria's involvement. Police reports filed by family members who'd finally recognized the pattern of theft masked as innocent mistakes. She manipulated her way into Amanda's professional circle not because she admired successful women, but because she saw opportunities for exploitation, Priya continued. She used her position as Amanda's assistant to steal confidential information. She coordinated with Samuel Morrison to damage a company that had given her nothing but opportunity and trust. The final section of Priya's video addressed Victoria's tearful social media performance directly. My sister is exceptionally talented at playing the victim. She cries on command. She constructs narratives where everyone else is cruel and she's simply misunderstood. But the truth is this: Victoria Chun is a thief, a manipulator, and a liar who destroys people who trust her. And I'm done protecting her from consequences she's earned through years of calculated harm. The video ended with Priya looking directly into the camera, her expression carrying the kind of finality that suggested burned bridges and severed ties. To my sister, you're not welcome in this family anymore. You're not welcome at family gatherings. You're not welcome to contact any of us seeking money or sympathy or another chance to exploit our love and trust. You made your choices. Now live with the consequences. The video went viral within hours, not because of theatrical emotion but because of its devastating credibility, its calm delivery of damning evidence, its complete dismantling of Victoria's carefully constructed victimhood narrative. Victoria's family released a joint statement by 9 p.m., formally disowning her and expressing support for Amanda. Her mother, who defended her daughter with fierce maternal loyalty just days ago, publicly apologized for Victoria's actions and confirmed that all family ties were permanently severed. The fall was spectacular and absolute. But it wasn't finished. At 11:47 p.m., Victoria's Instagram posted a message that suggested her alliance with Samuel had fractured under the weight of public exposure and mutual blame. To everyone asking, I'm done protecting Samuel Morrison. You want to know the truth? He planned everything. He researched Amanda. He recruited me to help steal information by promising me money and a relationship that was apparently as fake as everything else about him. I was stupid to believe him. I was stupid to think we had something real. But at least I'm not a serial predator who's been doing this for years. Samuel Morrison is a con artist, a liar, and a user who destroys everyone stupid enough to trust him. And yes, that includes me. I hope he gets everything he deserves. The post was deleted within minutes, probably by attorneys recognizing it as evidence of conspiracy and admission of guilt, but screenshots had already spread across social media platforms where deletion meant nothing and everything lived forever. Samuel responded an hour later through his own social media, apparently having abandoned all pretense of legal strategy in favor of public warfare. Victoria is lying to save herself. SHE approached me about targeting Amanda. SHE suggested stealing information. SHE coordinated everything while I was just trying to survive a controlling relationship. Don't let her rewrite history now that consequences are arriving. The public response was swift and merciless. They're both trash. Watching two liars destroy each other is satisfying. Amanda must be laughing watching them turn on each other. This is what happens to predators when the victim fights back. Amanda wasn't laughing. She sat in her penthouse surrounded by the furniture she'd selected with a man who'd been calculating her destruction, watching her phone light up with notifications about Samuel and Victoria's public warfare, feeling nothing resembling satisfaction or triumph or the vindication that everyone assumed she must be experiencing. Instead, she felt empty. Hollowed out by sustained betrayal and revelation after revelation about the depth of manipulation she'd survived, about how thoroughly she'd been deceived by people she'd trusted, about how her capacity for love and vulnerability had been weaponized against her by predators who'd viewed her humanity as exploitable weakness. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call. Samuel's name flashed across the screen, the same name that used to make her smile, that used to mean safety and partnership and the comfortable belief that she'd found someone who understood the pressure of her position and loved her despite and because of her success. Amanda declined the call without hesitation. It rang again 30 seconds later. She declined again. Third call. Fourth call. Fifth call. Each time, Amanda pressed decline with the same mechanical efficiency, feeling nothing except cold certainty that she would never again speak to the man who'd studied her like a business acquisition, who'd married her while planning her eventual exploitation, who'd stolen years of her life through calculated performance of love he'd never actually felt. The calls continued through the night, Samuel apparently desperate to explain or manipulate or reconstruct some version of their relationship that might salvage something from the spectacular destruction of his reputation and his victim narrative. But Amanda declined every single call. Because she was finally, completely, irrevocably done. Victoria appeared at Amanda's office building on a gray Thursday morning exactly 9 days after the press conference that had systematically dismantled both her victim narrative and her remaining credibility with anyone who possessed functioning critical thinking skills. The security guard called up from the lobby with a kind of uncertain tone that suggested he recognized this was delicate territory. The disgraced sister-in-law who'd participated in corporate espionage and betrayal now requesting access to the woman she'd helped destroy. "Ms. Festa, there's a Victoria Chen here asking to see you. She says it's urgent and personal." "Should I send her up?" Amanda said, surprising herself with the decision even as the words left her mouth. Not because she wanted reconciliation or believed any apology Victoria might offer could possibly be genuine, but because Amanda needed this moment. Needed to look into the face of someone who'd exploited her trust and kindness, needed to deliver refusal with the same grace and dignity she'd maintained throughout this entire nightmare, needed to close this particular chapter with finality that left no room for future manipulation attempts. Victoria emerged from the elevator looking nothing like the polished woman who'd smiled warmly while photographing confidential documents and coordinating with Samuel to systematically steal from someone who treated her like family. Her designer clothing had been replaced with something cheaper and less carefully curated. Her usually immaculate hair hung limp and unstyled. Dark circle-shadowed eyes that had cried real tears this time, not the performed emotion of her viral video, but genuine distress from watching her life collapse under the weight of consequences she'd earned through years of calculated harm. She stopped several feet from Amanda's desk, apparently recognizing that approaching closer without invitation would be presumptuous in ways that might trigger immediate ejection from the building. "Amanda," Victoria began, and her voice cracked with what sounded like authentic emotion, though Amanda had learned not to trust any performance from someone who'd proven capable of elaborate long-term deception. "Thank you for seeing me. I know I don't deserve." "You don't," Amanda interrupted calmly, her voice carrying none of the rage Victoria probably expected and might have even preferred because anger could be worked with, could be manipulated into eventual forgiveness through sustained apology and theatrical displays of remorse. "You don't deserve my time. You don't deserve my attention. You don't deserve the opportunity to explain or apologize or attempt to salvage anything from the wreckage you participated in creating." Victoria flinched as if physically struck, her eyes filling with tears that spilled down cheeks no longer enhanced with a strategic makeup that had made her crying video so visually compelling. "I was stupid," she whispered. "I was so incredibly stupid. Samuel promised me things, money, a relationship, a future, and I believed him because I wanted to believe someone like him could actually want someone like me. But I know that's not an excuse. I know I made choices. I stole from you. I betrayed your trust. I participated in something unforgivable." "Yes," Amanda agreed simply. "You did all of those things. And now you're here seeking what? Forgiveness? Absolution? Some indication that I understand your motivations and can therefore excuse your actions." "I just want you to know I'm sorry," Victoria said, her voice breaking completely. "I'm so sorry for everything. For the stealing, for Samuel, for destroying something good because I couldn't see past my own selfishness and stupidity. I know sorry doesn't fix anything, but I needed you to hear it. I needed you to know that I recognize how badly I messed up." Amanda studied the woman who'd once embraced her warmly while calling her an inspiration and a sister, who'd sat across from her at family dinners and holiday celebrations while secretly coordinating with Samuel to exploit every vulnerability and trust Amanda had offered with genuine affection. "I don't accept your apology," Amanda said quietly, and the words carried more finality than any shouted accusation or dramatic rejection could have achieved. Not because I'm cruel or unforgiving, but because I don't accept apologies from people who are only sorry they were exposed rather than genuinely remorseful about the harm they caused. Victoria's face crumpled, fresh tears streaming down in ways that might have moved Amanda months ago, before understanding that tears could be weapons wielded by people who'd refined manipulation into art form. If the press conference hadn't happened, Amanda continued with the same terrible calm, if Joseph hadn't exposed everything, if you and Samuel had successfully maintained your victim narratives while destroying my reputation, would you be here apologizing? Would you feel any remorse for what you'd done to me? The silence that followed answered more eloquently than any words Victoria might have constructed. That's what I thought, Amanda said. You're not sorry you betrayed me. You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry you're facing consequences. You're sorry your family disowned you and your reputation is destroyed and people see you for what you actually are rather than the victim persona you tried to construct. Please, Victoria whispered, but Amanda was already standing, already moving toward her office door in a clear dismissal that left no room for negotiation or extended conversation. I hope you find a way to live with what you've done, Amanda said, her hand on the door handle. I hope you eventually develop actual remorse rather than just regret about consequences. But I won't be part of that journey. You're not welcome in my life, in my spaces, or in any future I'm building. And if you truly understand the harm you caused, you'll respect that boundary and never contact me again. Victoria left without further protest, her shoulders hunched with what might have been shame or might have been just disappointment that her apology hadn't achieved whatever reconciliation or forgiveness she'd been hoping might salvage something from the spectacular destruction of her reputation and relationships. Amanda returned to her desk, feeling nothing except quiet relief that the encounter was finished and she'd maintained her dignity without being cruel or vindictive in ways that might later haunt her conscience. But she wasn't finished. For days later, Samuel appeared. Amanda's assistant called through the intercom with obvious discomfort. Ms. Festa, Samuel Morrison is here. He says he won't leave until you speak with him. Security is asking if they should remove him, but he's not being threatening, just insistent and... It's fine, Amanda interrupted, recognizing that this confrontation was probably inevitable and might as well happen on her terms in her space where she controlled the environment and the exit strategy. Send him in. But tell security to wait outside the door. Samuel entered looking like a man who'd survived weeks in wilderness rather than days since his public destruction. His usually immaculate appearance had deteriorated into something almost unrecognizable, rumpled clothing that suggested he'd slept in them or possibly hadn't slept at all, unshaven face making him look older and more desperate, eyes red-rimmed from crying or drinking or some combination of substances and emotions that had failed to provide relief from consequences. Amanda, he said, and his voice cracked on her name like something breaking that couldn't be repaired. Please, just listen to me. Just give me 5 minutes to explain. Explain what? Amanda asked, and her voice carried the same terrible calm that had characterized her rejection of Victoria's apology. Explain how you researched my net worth before meeting me? Explain how you engineered our introduction and cultivated our relationship as part of calculated long-term investment strategy? Explain how you married me while planning to challenge the prenup and extract maximum settlement. Samuel's face crumpled, tears spilling down his cheeks in a way that might have moved her months ago before understanding that even his emotions could be performance designed to manipulate her sympathies and soften her boundaries. I loved you, he whispered. I know you don't believe that now. I know the evidence makes it look like everything was calculation, but somewhere along the way I actually fell in love with you. You have to believe. I don't have to believe anything, Amanda interrupted. And what you're calling love was probably just your own confusion between genuine emotion and the performance you've been maintaining for so long that you forgot which parts were real and which parts were strategic positioning. She stood, moving to the windows overlooking Manhattan's glittering landscape where millions of people conducted their lives with varying degrees of honesty and deception and calculated manipulation. Do you know what the worst part is? Amanda asked, not turning to face him because she didn't need to see his expression to know what she needed to say. Not the affair. Not even the corporate espionage or the calculated targeting or the pre-wedding meeting with divorce attorneys. She paused, feeling something sharp and painful lodge in her chest where warmth and trust used to exist. "The worst part is that I actually loved you," Amanda continued quietly. "I restructured my entire life to accommodate you. I turned down business opportunities in other cities because you didn't want to relocate. I spent holidays with your family instead of traveling like I'd always wanted because you said family traditions mattered. I defended you to Joseph when he warned me about patterns he'd noticed. I chose you over my own instincts repeatedly because I believed in us." She finally turned to face him, and whatever Samuel saw in her expression made him step backward like she'd become something dangerous and unpredictable. "I gave you access to everything," Amanda said. "My home, my business, my heart, my vulnerability. I trusted you with parts of myself I'd never shown anyone else because corporate Amanda has to be perfect and untouchable, but with you I thought I could just be human and flawed and occasionally uncertain." Her voice remained steady despite the weight of what she was expressing, despite finally articulating the full scope of what his betrayal had cost her beyond money and reputation. "And you used all of that against me," Amanda finished. "You weaponized my love, my trust, my desire for genuine partnership. You turned every vulnerable moment into intelligence gathering for eventual exploitation. You made me afraid to ever trust anyone that completely again." Samuel was openly crying now, his shoulders shaking with sobs that sounded genuine but might have been just another performance from someone who'd spent years perfecting the art of emotional manipulation. "I'm sorry," he gasped. "Amanda, I'm so sorry. I know I can't fix this, I know you'll never forgive me, but please just know that I recognize how badly I destroyed something precious and real and—" "Get out," Amanda said quietly, but the words carried more force than any shouting could have achieved. "Get out of my office. Get out of my life. And don't ever contact me again for any reason unless it's through attorneys discussing the legal consequences of your fraud and corporate espionage." Samuel opened his mouth as if to protest or plead further, but something in Amanda's expression stopped him. He left without additional words, his exit marked by the same defeated posture Victoria had carried days earlier, shoulders slumped, movement suggesting someone who'd finally accepted that consequences were permanent and forgiveness wasn't coming. Amanda returned to her desk, feeling emotionally exhausted but somehow lighter, like she'd released weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying through the simple act of refusing to accept apologies that were offered more for the apologizer's relief than genuine remorse about harm caused. Her phone buzzed with a message from her attorney. Court ruling came through. Judge dismissed Samuel's lawsuit with prejudice. Found his claims fraudulent and awarded you legal fees plus sanctions against his attorneys for filing frivolous suit. "It's over, Amanda. You won. She won." The word should have felt triumphant, should have provided satisfaction or vindication or the sense of justice served that everyone assumed she must be craving. Instead, Amanda felt nothing except tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of defending herself against people who'd weaponized legal systems and public opinion and every available tool to try destroying her for daring to expose their predation. Tired of being strong and composed and maintaining perfect dignity, while everything inside her fractured and reformed into something harder and less capable of the kind of open trust she'd once offered so freely. Her phone buzzed again, this time a news alert. Morrison legal firm loses key investors following fraud revelations. Clients pull millions in wake of serial predation evidence. Samuel's professional destruction was complete and thorough. The law firm he'd built partially through connections Amanda had provided and information Victoria had stolen was collapsing as clients fled and investors withdrew, and every professional relationship he'd cultivated dissolved under the weight of his revealed character. Justice served through market forces and reputation economics. But Amanda found no satisfaction in his downfall, no pleasure in watching someone who'd claimed to love her lose everything through consequences of his own calculated choices. She just felt empty. Joseph arrived at her office an hour later, apparently sensing through brotherly intuition that Amanda needed company even if she wouldn't ask for it directly. "The lawsuit's dismissed," he said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "Samuel's firm is imploding. Victoria's family has formally disowned her. Catherine Zhang filed criminal charges yesterday. Federal prosecutors are investigating fraud and extortion. Everything we planned is working exactly as intended." "I know," Amanda said quietly. "So why do you look like someone who just lost rather than someone who just won?" Amanda was silent for a long moment, staring at the city beyond her windows where millions of people conducted their lives with varying degrees of honesty and deception and fundamental decency. Because winning feels like surviving rather than triumphing, she finally said. Because I'm not the same person I was before, understanding that love could be calculated strategy and trust could be exploited weakness. Because Samuel and Victoria lost, but I didn't really win, I just didn't lose as badly as I could have. Joseph moved around the desk to stand beside her, his hand settling on her shoulder with a kind of protective affection that had characterized their relationship since childhood. "What do you need?" he asked simply. Amanda took a deep breath, making a decision that had been forming in her mind for days as she'd navigated the aftermath of public warfare and rejected apologies from people who'd only been sorry about consequences rather than genuinely remorseful about harm caused. "I need to leave," she said. "Not forever. But for a while. I need distance from this city where everything reminds me of what I survived. I need space to figure out who I am now that I'm not constantly defending myself or managing crisis or maintaining perfect composure while falling apart inside." She turned to face her brother, seeing understanding rather than protest in his expression. "I'm leaving the country," Amanda said, and the words felt like permission and possibility combined. "For 6 months, maybe longer. The company's stable. I have executives capable of running operations. And I need to remember what it feels like to exist as just Amanda rather than Amanda Festa, tech billionaire who survived spectacular betrayal and emerged victorious." Joseph smiled, not the predatory grin he'd worn while orchestrating Samuel's destruction, but something gentler and more genuine. "Where will you go?" he asked. "I don't know yet," Amanda admitted. "Somewhere quiet. Somewhere beautiful. Somewhere nobody knows my story or my net worth or anything except that I'm a woman trying to figure out how to trust again after learning that trust can be weaponized by predators wearing masks of people who claim to love you." "Good," Joseph said simply. "Go. Heal. Find yourself again. And when you're ready to come back, if you're ready to come back, we'll all be here waiting." Amanda leaned into her brother's embrace, feeling the first genuine hope she'd experienced since the night her world fractured at his wedding reception. She was leaving. And maybe, somewhere far from the wreckage of her marriage and the battlefield of her public vindication, she could start rebuilding into someone who wasn't defined by what she'd survived, but rather by who she chose to become. The coastal town of Positano clung to the cliffs like a prayer whispered in stone and sunlight, its pastel buildings cascading down to the Tyrrhenian Sea in defiance of gravity and common sense. Amanda had chosen Italy's Amalfi Coast for reasons she couldn't entirely articulate, something about the way the light transformed ordinary moments into something sacred, the way centuries of human persistence against impossible geography suggested that survival itself could be beautiful. She'd been here for 3 weeks, living in a small villa tucked away from the tourist corridors where Instagram influencers posed for perfect photos that captured nothing real. Her days had fallen into rhythms that felt almost revolutionary in their simplicity. Morning coffee on the terrace overlooking water that shifted between impossible shades of blue, afternoons reading books that had nothing to do with business strategy or corporate warfare, evenings walking narrow streets where nobody recognized her name or her net worth or the scandal that had consumed her life months ago. This morning, Amanda stood on her terrace as dawn painted the sky in colors that reminded her why humans had always associated sunrise with hope and new beginnings and the stubborn possibility of transformation. The sea below reflected the changing light, transforming from dark mystery into something luminous and welcoming. She'd survived. The thought arrived with quiet certainty rather than triumphant declaration, settling into her chest with a weight of truth that had taken months to fully comprehend. She'd survived Samuel's calculated betrayal and Victoria's complicity, and the public warfare that had threatened to destroy not just her reputation, but her fundamental ability to trust in anything good or genuine or worth protecting with vulnerability. She'd survived the real show, Joseph's perfectly orchestrated exposure, the lawsuit that had tried rewriting her as villain instead of victim, the apologies from people who were only sorry about consequences rather than genuinely remorseful about harm caused. And somewhere in the wreckage of what she'd thought her life would be, Amanda had started discovering who she actually was beneath all the armor she constructed to survive in corporate environments designed to punish women who dared to be powerful and successful and unwilling to shrink themselves into acceptable shapes. Her phone buzzed against the terrace table, Joseph's name flashing across the screen alongside a photo of them from childhood, both grinning with a kind of uncomplicated joy that existed before understanding that people could be predators wearing masks of affection. "Morning, sis." Joseph's voice carried warmth that felt like home despite the ocean separating them. "How's paradise treating you?" "Like I might actually be human instead of a corporate machine," Amanda admitted, surprised by how easily the confession emerged. "I slept until 8 this morning without setting an alarm. I can't remember the last time that happened." "Good," Joseph said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "You needed this. You needed distance from everything that tried consuming you." Amanda was quiet for a moment, watching fishing boats navigate the morning sea with practiced efficiency, their movements suggesting generations of accumulated knowledge about tides and weather and surviving forces larger than individual human will. "Joseph," she said slowly, "do you think I'll ever be able to trust anyone again the way I trusted Samuel? Do you think I'll ever look at someone and not immediately start cataloging warning signs and calculating exit strategies?" The silence on the other end lasted long enough that Amanda wondered if the connection had dropped, if distance and technology had conspired to cut off this conversation before Joseph could deliver whatever wisdom or reassurance he'd been preparing. "You didn't lose a husband," Joseph finally said, and his voice carried the kind of fierce certainty that had characterized his protection of her since childhood. "You lost a parasite. A predator. Someone who was never worthy of the trust you offered him." He paused, letting the words settle. "And yes," he continued, "you'll trust again. Maybe not the same way, maybe not with the kind of open vulnerability that can be weaponized by people who mistake kindness for weakness. But you'll find people worthy of your trust. You'll build relationships with humans who understand that love is supposed to add to your life instead of systematically extracting from it." Something tight in Amanda's chest loosened slightly, some tension she hadn't realized she'd been carrying finally beginning to release its grip on her ability to imagine futures beyond survival and defensive positioning. "When did you get so wise?" she asked, and for the first time in months, she felt laughter bubbling up from somewhere genuine rather than performed. Not the bitter laugh of someone watching their enemies destroy themselves, but something lighter and more authentic. "I've always been wise," Joseph said, mock offended. "You just spent years being too busy building empires to notice." Amanda laughed, actually laughed, and the sound felt like reclaiming something she'd thought Samuel had stolen permanently. The laughter echoed across her terrace, mixing with the morning sounds of Positano waking up, and she realized that joy still existed inside her beneath all the scar tissue and defensive hardening. They talked for another 20 minutes about nothing particularly important: Joseph's latest case, their mother's attempts at learning Italian cooking, gossip about mutual friends navigating their own relationship complications with varying degrees of success and disaster. When they finally disconnected, Amanda felt lighter somehow, like Joseph's voice had reminded her that she wasn't defined by what she'd survived, but rather by how she chose to move forward from devastation into whatever came next. She dressed in comfortable linen clothing that felt nothing like the armor she wore to boardrooms, twisted her hair into a casual bun that would have horrified her professional stylists, and headed down the cliffside stairs toward the town center where the morning market transformed narrow streets into organized chaos of local vendors and tourists and residents negotiating for fresh fish and produce and bread still warm from ancient ovens. The market overwhelmed her senses in the best possible way, the smell of espresso and fresh basil and lemon so fragrant they seemed to carry concentrated sunshine, the sound of Italian and English and German mixing together as people conducted the universal business of feeding themselves and their families, the colors of tomatoes and peppers and flowers competing for attention against whitewashed walls and brilliant sky. Amanda was examining hand-painted ceramics at a vendor's stall, running her fingers across glazed surfaces decorated with lemons and vines and geometric patterns that suggested Moorish influences filtered through Italian sensibilities, when someone collided with her from behind with enough force to nearly send the delicate plate she'd been holding crashing to the cobblestones. Strong hands caught her shoulders, steadying her with a kind of casual competence that suggested physical confidence without aggression. "Me despias." "I'm so sorry," a voice said in English accented with something that sounded vaguely Australian or possibly New Zealand, that particular combination of British formality and relaxed informality that characterized English as spoken in the Southern Hemisphere. Amanda turned to find a man roughly her age looking genuinely distressed about the collision, his expression radiating the kind of authentic concern that came from people who genuinely worried about causing accidental harm to strangers. He was attractive in ways that felt completely different from Samuel's calculated charm, sun-weathered skin suggesting time spent outdoors rather than in carefully controlled indoor environments, hair slightly too long and unstyled in ways that suggested genuine indifference to fashion rather than strategic casualness, clothing that looked comfortable and worn rather than designer-selected for maximum impression. His eyes were remarkable, green-gray like the sea during uncertain weather, carrying warmth and intelligence without the calculating assessment that had characterized Samuel's gaze whenever he'd looked at her and seen investment opportunity rather than human being. "Are you all right?" he asked, still steadying her even though she'd regained her balance, his touch gentle and respectful rather than possessive or presumptuous. "I'm fine," Amanda assured him, surprised by how genuine her smile felt. "No harm done. The plate survived." He released her shoulders, stepping back with a kind of spatial awareness that suggested he understood appropriate boundaries and didn't use accidental physical contact as excuse for extended touching. "I'm typically more coordinated," he said, his expression self-deprecating rather than performatively charming. "But I was distracted by the architecture. These buildings defy every structural principle I learned in university, and I can't stop trying to figure out how they've survived centuries of weather and earthquakes." "You're an architect?" Amanda asked, filing away that information alongside her immediate impression that this man radiated sincerity rather than strategy, warmth rather than calculated charm. "Marco Ricci," he introduced himself, extending his hand for a handshake that felt refreshingly professional rather than attempting to transform simple greeting into intimate connection. "I design sustainable housing projects, mostly affordable developments in communities that need infrastructure without sacrificing environmental responsibility or cultural identity." His handshake was firm without being aggressive, brief without being dismissive, and Amanda found herself relaxing in ways she hadn't around men since understanding that Samuel had weaponized every interaction for eventual exploitation. "Amanda," she offered, deliberately omitting her last name and her title and every piece of information that might trigger recognition or transform her into Amanda Festa, tech billionaire, rather than just Amanda, woman healing in Italian coastal town. "Beautiful name," Marco said, and the compliment felt genuine rather than performed, just an observation he'd felt compelled to share without strategic intent or manipulation underlying the words. "Are you here on holiday?" "Something like that," Amanda said carefully, not quite ready to articulate that she was here recovering from spectacular betrayal and public warfare and the complete destruction of her ability to trust her own judgment about people's fundamental character. Marco seemed to sense a reluctance to elaborate, nodding with a kind of understanding that suggested he'd experienced his own complicated reasons for being in beautiful places far from wherever home used to be. "Well," he said, gesturing toward the market continuing its cheerful chaos around them, "if you're looking for the best coffee in Positano, and I mean genuinely the best, not the tourist traps near the beach, there's a small place about 3 streets up that the locals actually use. I'm heading there now if you'd like company." The invitation was casual, offering companionship without pressure, suggesting possibility without demanding commitment or immediate intimacy that would feel overwhelming to someone still rebuilding capacity for trust. Amanda hesitated for exactly 3 seconds, calculating risk, analyzing potential warning signs, searching for evidence of calculation or strategic positioning that might suggest Marco was something other than what he appeared to be. But sometimes, she realized with sudden clarity, trust wasn't about perfect certainty or guaranteed safety. Sometimes trust was about choosing to risk vulnerability again despite knowing that risk could result in harm, about believing that not everyone was a predator just because predators existed. "I'd like that," Amanda said, and meant it. They walked together through narrow streets climbing up from the market, their conversation flowing with surprising ease as Marco pointed out architectural details and shared stories about sustainable housing projects in communities around the world, his passion for his work evident in every animated gesture and enthusiastic explanation. He didn't ask invasive questions about her background or her reasons for being in Positano. He didn't try to impress her with carefully rehearsed stories designed to demonstrate his value or worthiness. He simply existed beside her with comfortable authenticity, sharing coffee and conversation, and the kind of genuine human connection that didn't demand anything except mutual present-moment attention. And for the first time in months, maybe years, Amanda felt something in her chest that resembled hope rather than defensive calculation, possibility rather than strategic risk assessment. She wasn't healed completely. She wasn't magically transformed back into the woman who trusted easily and loved openly before understanding that trust could be weaponized and love could be performance art designed to facilitate exploitation. But she was healing. And maybe that was enough for today. This moment of connection with a stranger who might become a friend or might remain just a pleasant memory of morning coffee in an Italian coastal town where nobody knew her story except the chapters she chose to share. Amanda laughed at something Marco said about engineering disasters he'd witnessed. The sound genuine and light and completely her own. The sun climbed higher, painting everything in golden light that transformed ordinary moments into something worth remembering. And Amanda Festa, survivor, entrepreneur, woman learning to trust again, realized something profound. She had survived the real show, and now for the first time in years, Amanda was ready to live her own story.
And that, my beautiful family, is how a woman who had everything stolen from her discovered she was never defined by what was taken. Amanda built an empire with brilliance and hard work. But Samuel and Victoria saw only opportunity. Not the human being who trusted them, not the heart that loved them, not the soul that believed in their goodness. They thought they could break her. They thought betrayal would shatter her beyond repair. But here's what predators never understand. Survival isn't weakness. It's the fiercest kind of strength. Amanda didn't just survive, she reclaimed herself. She walked away from people who saw her as a transaction and toward a life where she could be human again, vulnerable again, open again. So if you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely, if you've ever had your kindness weaponized against you, if you've ever wondered if you'll ever trust again, remember Amanda's story. You are not broken. You are not naive. You are not foolish for believing in love. You are worthy of genuine affection, honest partnership, and relationships built on truth instead of calculation. If this story resonated with your journey, click subscribe, type "I choose myself" in the comments, and tell me where you're watching from. Because tomorrow brings another story of triumph over betrayal, another reminder that your dignity can never be stolen, only surrendered. Until next time, this is Mr. Crown Stories reminding you, you are not what happened to you. You are how you rise from it, and your sunrise is coming.